Game na?
Malapit na po lalo sa huli.
Ako yan. Mauna na naman ako mag-announce. At least early siya. Yan, wala pa rin siya sa huli. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all rise for the arrival of the Honorable Senate President and the Senators of the Republic of the Philippines.
The 57th session of the Senate and the first regular session of the 18th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Amy Marcos will lead the chamber in prayer.
Father, you're the Lord and the one true master of our beautiful nation. Nothing that happens in this country, may it be good or evil, ever escapes you, nor are you ever caught by surprise, like us, hapless and vulnerable. It is thus that we beseech you today to protect us from all evil, from enemies both natural and human, from new and mutating diseases, from nature's calamities and endless conflict. Protect us, O Lord, from the greed and avarice of men and of nations. Lord, by the authority you have given us, the senators of this blessed republic, we beg for your mercy and the protection of our people, for every Filipino in pain, in poverty, in sickness. Today we declare and decree that with you we shall fight the enemies, illegal drugs, corruption, terrorism, and the scourge of godlessness that plagues our nation. Take charge, O Lord. Protect and guide us, so that once again your glory will fill our islands, the Philippines. In the name of Jesus we believe and pray. Amen.
Amen. The Secretary will please call the roll.
Roll call of members, the Honorable Senators Angara, Binay, Cayetano, De Lima, De La Rosa, Drilon, Gatchalian, Go, Gordon, Ontiveros, Lacson, Lapid, Marcos, Pacquiao, Pangilinan, Pimentel, Poe, Recto, Revilla, Tolentino, Villanueva, Villar, Zubiri, Senate President Soto III.
With 18 senators present, the chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Leader.
Mayor of Mindoro. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, before we take up official matters, we just have got some guests at the gallery. Of course, our chairperson of the Commission on Higher Education, our dear friend Popoy de Vera, is here with us. Chairman Popoy de Vera is with us today. We also have with us the Mayor of Pola Oriental Mindoro, Mayor Ina Alegre Cruz, and our Binibining Pilipinas candidate Patricia Garcia. Guest of Senator Ralph Recto and Senator
All right.
Bongo.
Yes, we welcome all our guests to the Senate this afternoon. And the chair stands corrected. There were 20 senators present.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I did not see Senator Recto and Senator Villar by the hallway.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 56th session, Tuesday, February 18, 2020, and consider the same as approved. So moved.
Any objection? Hearing none, the journal is approved. Majority Leader.
While we are awaiting the guest of Senator Cayetano to enter the gallery, Mr. President, for a sponsorship speech, I move to proceed with the reference of business.
Yes, the Secretary will proceed with the reference of business.
Reference of business. Message from the House of Representatives. Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 17 February 2020, it passed House Number 137 entitled An Act Imposing Stiffer Penalties for Child Abuse, Exploitation, and Discrimination, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 7610 as amended, in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate.
Referred to the Committees on Justice and the Committee on Women.
Bills on first reading, Senate Number 1360, entitled An Act Making the Position of a Cooperative Officer Mandatory in the Municipal, City, and Provincial levels, amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 7160, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991, introduced by Senator Ontiveros.
Referred to the Committees on Local Government and Cooperatives.
Senate Number 1361, an act mandating banking institutions to strengthen the financing system for agricultural, fisheries, and rural development in the Philippines and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Angara.
Referred to Committees on Agriculture and Banks.
Senate Number 1362, an act creating a framework for the Sustainable Development Goals, introduced by Senator Cayetano.
Referred to the Committee on Sustainable Development Goals.
Senate Number 1363, an act providing for protection of the remittances of overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
Referred to Committees on Banks and Labor.
Senate Number 1364, an act reducing food waste through food donations and food waste recycling, introduced by Senator Pacquiao.
Referred to Committees on Agriculture, Social Justice, and Ways and Means.
Resolutions. PS Resolution Number 326, entitled Resolution Directing the Appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the implementation of martial law in Mindanao, pursuant to Proclamation Number 26 issued by President Rodrigo R. Duterte on 23 May 2017, with the end in view of chronicling the accomplishments and learnings during the period, determining whether or not the rebellion in the region was put under control, and exacting accountability on how public funds were spent, the number of arrests made and cases filed, how the government dealt with human rights violations in the region, and how government is helping in the rehabilitation of the region, introduced by Senator De Lima.
Referred to the Committee on National Defense.
PS Resolution Number 327, Resolution Directing the Appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the alleged reports of historical revisionism propagated using the official gazette, and into the purported deletion and inaccessibility of documents and vital information therein, to ensure that the reliability and veracity of matters contained therein are held sacred and preserved with utmost diligence, introduced by Senator De Lima.
Referred to the Committee on Public Information and Mass Media.
PS Resolution Number 328, Resolution urging the appropriate Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation into the continued flights from China and its special administrative regions in violation of a travel ban and putting Filipinos at risk, introduced by Senator Marcos.
To the Committee on Public Services.
PS Resolution Number 329, Resolution directing the appropriate Senate committees to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the national water programs, activities, and projects being implemented by the government to ensure adequate supply of water throughout the country and to ensure that a water crisis is averted, introduced by Senator Villanueva.
To the Committees on Public Works and Environment.
Communications, letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of Republic Act Number 7653, the new Central Bank Act. Memorandum numbers M2020-001 and 002, both dated 30 January 2020, and Circular Number 1072 dated 31 January 2020.
To the Committee on Banks.
Committee report. Committee report number 51, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Basic Education, Arts and Culture, Youth, Ways and Means, and Finance on Senate number 1365 with Senators Gatchalian and Binay as authors thereof, entitled An Act Institutionalizing the Alternative Learning System in Basic Education for Out-of-School Youth, Adults, and Children in Special Extreme Cases and Appropriating Funds therefore, recommending its approval in substitution of Senate number 740, sponsor Senator Gatchalian.
To the calendar for ordinary business. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we'd just like to acknowledge the guests in the gallery. These are the guests of Senator Pia Cayetano. We have with us, of course, our distinguished Secretary of the Department of Finance, Secretary Sunny Dominguez is here with us, together with former Prime Minister Cesar Virata, former DOF Secretary Margarito Gai Teves, We have also with us Secretary Mon Lopez, Super Mon of the DTI, my good friend. We have also with us Secretary Ernie Pernia of the NEDA. Undersecretary Carl Chua is here with us also, our Suki. Undersecretary Perry Rodolfo of the DTI. We have also Governor of the Managers Association of the Philippines, Chairman of the Tax Committee and PCCI, Attorney Benedicta Dick Du Balad, Mr. Jeffrey Nan, Chairman of the SH, the Housing Developers Association, Inc. We have also Filomeno Men Santa Ana, Coordinator, Action of Economic Reforms, Dr. Ling Ling Patalinghug, Professor Emeritus of UP Verata School of Business, and Dr. Reside, Professor of the UP School of Economics, Mr. President. We have also with us guests from Dagupan City, Councilor Cisco Flores and Attorney Edel Morales, Mr. President.
All right, we'd like to welcome our distinguished guests to the Senate this afternoon.
Mr. President, with the permission of the body, I would like to transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order Senate Bill number 1357 under Committee Report number 50. I so move.
Any objection? Motion is approved. The Senate bill is transferred.
Mr. President, I move to consider Senate Bill number 1357 and ask Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration is in order. The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act reforming the corporate income tax and incentive system, amending for the purpose sections 4, 20, 27, 28, 34, and 290 of the National Internal Revenue Code of 1997 as amended, and creating therein new Title 13 and for other purposes.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, may we recognize the distinguished sponsor, the chairperson of the Committee on Ways and Means, no other than Senator Pia Cayetano.
The distinguished lady from Taguig and Pateros, chairperson of Committee on Ways and Means, is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I ask for a minute suspension while we set up the screen?
Session suspended.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Session resumed.
before we recognize the distinguished sponsor, we'd just like to recognize as well in the gallery, we have two colleagues from the House of Representatives. We have with us Congressman Suarez and Congresswoman Swan Singh is here with us as well.
Yes, we'd like to welcome them to the Senate, Congresswoman Swan Singh, and the debonair governor of Quezon, who is now a congressman, Congressman Suarez.
We can recognize Senator Pia Cayetano now, sir.
Yes, Senator Pia Cayetano has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, today I rise to sponsor and seek your support for Senate Bill number 1357 per Committee Report number 50, also known as the CITIRA bill, which has two main objectives: lowering the corporate income tax rate and modernizing the tax incentive system, making it more fair, efficient, and accountable. Mr. President, from the onset, let me clarify a major issue. A major source of resistance to this bill is the fear that incentives will be removed once this measure is enacted. This will not be the case. Mr. President, in truth, what we intend to do is continue a sound investment scheme, the details of which this representation will explain as we go along. Having said that, allow me to start with a bit of history. I am sure that both Senate President Soto and Senate Minority Leader Drilon, the leaders of both sides of this chamber, would also know from their experience that since a bill on rationalizing tax incentives was first proposed in 1995, the Department of Finance and the Department of Trade and Industry have urged Congress to finally make this crucial reform happen. But even further down memory lane, when I was a college student in the School of Economics in the University of the Philippines, my father, the late Senator Rene Cayetano, was a member of the Batasan and was appointed as the Deputy Minister for Trade and Industry and concurrently Administrator of the Export Processing Zone Authority, otherwise known as EPSA. I had the opportunity to visit the export processing zones in Bataan, Baguio, and Cebu. In fact, my thesis was on fiscal incentives. This was in 1985. But here we are today in the year 2020. Mr. President, in the series of hearings and meetings we conducted, we gave members of the business community, civil society, the academe, government, and business associations the opportunity to share their views in depth. The DOF and DTI also held their own briefings with key stakeholders. The bill before us is a new and fairer deal between businesses and the Filipino people. So where are we now and what are we doing? We are cognizant that the Philippine enterprises are the backbone of the economy and that they contribute to national development by supplying much-needed employment and livelihood. And yet, companies doing business in the Philippines are slapped with a 30% corporate income tax rate, the highest in the region. May I direct the body's attention to the screen where it shows the Philippines on the far right with the highest corporate income tax rate. To address this, we will bring down the corporate income tax rate from 30% to 20% over the next 10 years. This should result in some 1.5 million more jobs, a feat I am certain that we can accomplish, as so far we have already provided millions of jobs to the economy. We believe that the reduction of 1% per year is the pace that does not compromise the country's vital fiscal resources. However, Mr. President, we cannot talk about corporate tax regime without earnestly discussing the tax regime for companies that have received unreviewed and almost unconditional special tax treatment for decades. From 2015 to 2017, the Philippine government granted more than 1 trillion pesos in tax incentives. in the form of exemptions and tax discounts to various companies. In 2017 alone, the government granted billions of pesos to a select group of some 3,150 businesses. These companies pay an effective rate of 6 to 13% of corporate income tax, as opposed to other enterprises that pay the regular 30% corporate income tax. Let me make this clear again. I mentioned the amount of incentives, Mr. President, not to say that we will scrap them. All we want to do is rationalize them. Incentives should not be given out to any corporation without the proper conditions. They should be performance-based and targeted, and granted in such a way that would benefit the public by way of providing employment, boosting needed industries, and promoting the growth of less developed areas in the country. When we give out incentives on behalf of the people, then we are duty-bound to ascertain that we get what is rightly due to them. That is the essence of this bill, a fair deal for all and the best deal for Filipinos. My point, Mr. President, is that true incentives yield results, like the situation with our neighbors, Singapore and Malaysia. If a tax perk is given without a clear set of conditions, without a time limit, without adequate oversight, it is not an incentive. It is a giveaway, and our country cannot afford corporate giveaways. The billions of incentives we granted are equivalent to more than 10% of our 2020 national government budget, around 80% of the budget of DepEd, and more than 4 times the amount allocated to the Department of Health. So let's discuss the tax incentive principles. With billions of pesos on the line, we need to ensure that the incentives which the government provides are in accordance with the following principles based on international good practices. Number 1, performance-based. There should be clear attainment of actual investment, job creation, export, countryside development, and research and development commitments. Else incentives will only be wasted. Parang scholarship grant, dapat may resulta, pasado sa exam at makagraduate. Targeted. To minimize, number 2, targeted. To minimize leakage and to avoid spreading our scarce resources too thinly, tax incentives should be given to activities with significant positive contribution to the economy, or those that really matter for the future, as specified in a strategic investment priority plan to be determined by the BOI. Time-bound. There should be a reasonable time frame for the enjoyment of incentives and an extension period for companies that perform and contribute to the economy. Parang allowance na binibigay ng magulang sa anak, hindi pwedeng habang buhay. And finally, transparent. Monitoring and evaluation of tax incentives should be institutionalized and reported by the government to the public. Yung pinaghihirapan buwis ng ordinaryong taxpayer ang ginagamit natin pampondo sa incentives. Kaya nararapat lamang na alam ng taong bayan kung saan napupunta ang buwis nila. And let me add another principle. The incentive system should be governed well. Currently, there are 13 different investment promotion agencies or IPAs, each with its own charter and mandate, that offer different menus of incentives to various industries, sometimes not in line with national priorities, and often without the DOF or DTI knowing. As a result, there is no one simple set of incentives that the country may promote to potential investors. This can be very confusing and definitely not investor-friendly. Another concern is that the number of industries that could potentially get incentives from these IPAs, which is some 2/3 of the economy, also make our incentive system indiscriminately open to just about any activity, and thus open to abuse. This representation thus proposes that there be, 1, a set of incentives for different projects or activities depending on the location and industry, and 2, incentives that shall be based on the Strategic Investment Priority Plan, which will be determined by the BOI in coordination with the Fiscal Incentive Review Board, IPAs, government agencies administering tax incentives, and the private sector. We also propose to expand the functions of the Fiscal Incentive Review Board, a body that currently grants incentive to government-owned or controlled corporations, to also approve all incentives given to private companies as recommended by the IPAs. We also recommend that this board oversee the IPAs. This much-needed governance reform is at the heart of the CITIRA bill. Before I proceed with more details of the proposed bill, allow me to acknowledge the work of some of our predecessors, such as Senator Recto, who filed the first Fiscal Incentive Review Board expansion bill in 2001, and Senator Drilon, who authored the Tax Incentive Management and Transparency Act, or the TIMTA law, which passed in 2015. The law mandates companies to provide the government with data to estimate the tax incentives they receive, which is now being used to objectively assess our tax incentives. Both senators, along with Senators Lacson and Villar, have also filed in previous Congresses bills on fiscal incentives rationalization. We are now building on their ideas to move the reform forward. I would also like to put on record that our team painstakingly took the time to ease the transition period for investors and minimize the drastic changes the new incentive schemes could bring to their businesses. Let me now discuss the salient points of the reform as proposed by this representation. Reduction in the corporate income tax rate. As mentioned earlier, the corporate income tax rate shall be lowered gradually by 1% point each year from the current 30% to 20% by 2029. We have made the reduction of corporate income tax automatic in our version for the first 5 years to ensure predictability. By 2025, the reduction can be suspended by the President upon recommendation of the Secretary of Finance if the projected deficit target as a percentage of GDP exceeds the program deficit. Modernization of the fiscal incentive system. The centerpiece of the country's current tax incentive regime is the income tax holiday, or ITH, for 4 to 6 years, and the special 5% tax on gross income earned, or GIE, in lieu of all taxes, both national and local. The 5% tax on GIE is granted forever without conditions. Even if the firm does not contribute to the economy in terms of jobs and exports at a level commensurate to the amount of incentives given. My dear colleagues, no other country gives incentives forever like we do. Dear colleagues, it is time to end a regime that distributes costs to the many and concentrates benefits to the few. Sunset provisions. After listening to the concerns and apprehensions of existing investor groups that will be affected by this bill, we came up with terms that address the request for a smoother transition period. This addresses our objective, which is to keep companies and investors here in the country while rationalizing the incentives that we give them. Those granted income tax holiday only. Existing registered activities granted the income tax holiday shall be allowed to complete the remainder of their income tax period. For those granted 5% GIE but not yet enjoyed, these are the firms with unfinished income tax holiday and a succeeding gross income earned of 5%. In their case, their ITH, their income tax holiday, will be allowed to expire on schedule and will be followed by a 5% GIE with a maximum of 5 years. If the firm has no income tax holiday but is about to go into the 5% gross income earned, they will also enjoy 5% GIE for a maximum of 5 years. Granted and currently enjoying 5% GIE forever. Existing registered activities that were granted the 5% tax on GIE in lieu of all taxes will be allowed 2 to 7 more years as a transition period while paying the same rate of 5% GIE. The duration of the proposed transition period is as follows. 2 years for those who have been receiving the GIE incentive for more than 10 years. 3 years for those receiving the GIE incentive between 5 to 10 years. 5 years for those who have been receiving the GIE incentive for below 5 years, and a special 7 years for those that meet any of the following conditions. exporting 100% of their goods and services, employing at least 10,000 Filipino workers, or engaging in highly footloose activities. And in addition, Mr. President, after the sunset period, they will be allowed to apply under the new incentive package where they will be assessed by virtue of the new package created by this bill. So what is the new incentive package? Under our version of CITIRA, a registered activity may be granted an income tax holiday of 2 to 4 years, followed by a special corporate income tax rate that is based on gross income earned. The special corporate income tax rate will be equivalent to 8% GIE for 2020, 9% for 2021, and 10% for 2022 and onward. Like the current system, this shall be in lieu of all other taxes and can be availed of for 3 to 4 years, depending on the location and activity. This provision preserves the one-stop shop nature of present incentives. We hear the concerns of investors that they do not want to deal with many government agencies when paying taxes. This is why we retain the in lieu of provision and one-stop shop. Based on my discussion with the firms, this particular provision already addresses 90% of their concerns. The initial availment of tax incentives, which includes income tax holiday plus the special corporate income tax rate, is from 5 to 8 years, depending on the category of the registered activity as indicated on the screen. There are 3 categories: basic, enhanced, and advanced. This is our response to the need to make incentives more targeted to locations that need them and industries that we want to promote. Duration of the income tax holiday and special corporate income tax per category is already shown in the screen, and there is more good news in our version. The availment of special corporate income tax may be extended by 3 to 4 years at a time or more than once, up to a maximum of 12 years, depending on the category, so long as the firm remains true to its performance commitments. In lieu of the special corporate income tax, the registered activity may instead be granted enhanced deductions shown on the screen subject to the regular prevailing corporate income tax rates. These enhanced deduction incentives incentivize good behavior such as local job creation, exports, and investment in high-tech. As proposed by the DTI, our enhanced deduction menu was expanded to include deductions for power costs to account for the country's challenges in this area. The expanded deduction list is shown on the screen. Like the ITH and the special corporate income tax, the availment of the enhanced deduction may be extended also for up to 12 years. And to attract the big investors like what Vietnam did with Samsung, the President may give incentives for a longer period of up to 40 years for highly desirable projects, provided that the benefit that the public could derive from such investment is clear and convincing and far outweighs the cost of the incentives that will be granted. Governance of fiscal incentives. To ensure that incentives granted are performance-based, time-bound, targeted, and transparent, the present Fiscal Incentives Review Board's function is expanded so that it can provide proper oversight over the IPAs, in the same way that the GCG law of 2011 created the Governance Commission on GOCCs to oversee the GOCCs and ensure better performance and accountability. Under our proposal, the board will be chaired by the DOF and co-chaired by the DTI, with representatives from the Office of the President, DBM, and NEDA. Let me assure all the officials and employees of the IPAs that we are not abolishing your agencies or cutting down your jobs. IPAs will continue to perform their function of promoting investments in the Philippines, receive and process application, and recommend to the Fiscal Incentive Review Board worthy incentives for approval by the board. None of you shall lose your jobs because of this reform. Section 9 of Senate Bill number 1357 specifically provides The IPA shall maintain their function and powers as provided under the special laws governing them, except on the approval of incentives. Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, allow me to underscore one final point, and this is the urgency of our task ahead. Let us end uncertainty. As an economics graduate, Mr. President, I was trained to think of resources, including our fiscal space, as limited. With limited fiscal resources derived from the hard work of our countrymen, we must ask ourselves the following questions as we deliberate on this measure. Should we cut taxes for the many, or should we keep conditions loose for the few? Should we move incentives towards Philippine labor and Philippine products, or should we continue privileges that have gained our economy little value added? When we spend our country's fiscal resources, do we prefer more accountability or less? On these basic questions of principle, I trust that this Senate of the People has seen the merits of this reform. Further, as part of our commitment to the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, all efforts must be exerted to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. This is the ideal future, a future where there is no poverty and where our people and economy thrive. Rationalizing incentives and lowering the corporate income tax will bring in more investments and provide more jobs for Filipinos. This ensures we remain on target with SDG 8, which promotes decent work and economic growth. SDG 9, promoting inclusive and sustainable industrialization and fostering innovation. And of course, SDG 1, which calls for ending poverty in all its forms. This is only the beginning, as working on just one SDG creates a ripple effect on all the other SDGs, especially on hunger, health, education, and equality. A flourishing economy driven by the Filipino people will safeguard the country's future even beyond 2030. Dear colleagues, you have appointed me to be your chair of the Committee on Ways and Means and trusted this representation to study the matter and make recommendations. I humbly ask that you review these proposals, keeping in mind that the greater majority will benefit from the lowering of the corporate income tax, and that a rationalized incentive scheme that rewards investments that are result-based will lead to greater prosperity for our nation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano. The Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study the measure further, we move to suspend consideration of the same.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the measure is in order. The suspension of the consideration of the measure.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1083.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 1083 is in order.
The status, Mr. President, we're in the period of final individual amendments. May we recognize Senator Panfilo Ping Lacson to sponsor the measure and to propound amendments. Senator Frank Drilon, our distinguished minority floor leader.
All right, the gentleman from Cavite, Chairman of the Committee on National Defense, Senator Lacson, is recognized, and the Minority Leader, Senator Frank Drilon, gentleman from Iloilo, will continue the period of individual amendments, which is the parliamentary status at the moment. We will now be using the amended copy as of February 18, 2020.
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Thank you.
So can we start on page 1, Mr. President? Yes. Mr. President, on page 1, section 1, we propose to go back to the text of the original title of the Anti-Terrorism Act as contained in the committee report and change the year to 2020. If accepted, section 1 will now read, short title, the Act shall henceforth be known as the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020. We submit, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
What does the sponsor say? The sponsor will reply after the session in the back is adjourned. Are you discussing the bamboo bill in the back?
Yes. May we request for 1 minute suspension, Mr.
Session
President?
suspended. Sabihan niyo yun.
I think we can resume, Mr. President.
All right, this session is resumed. Again,
Yes, Mr. President, we have proposed the amendment of Section 1 on the premise that in our discussion with the good sponsor, he has agreed to use the noun terrorism to describe the crime rather than terrorist act. As we explained to the good sponsor, the crimes under the revised penal code are in nouns rather than adjectives. Except for acts of lasciviousness, I don't find any crime in the penal code which describes it in as an act and always as a noun. It is in that regard that we are proposing amendment to Section 1 so that it is now called the Anti-Terrorism Act of 2020, a shorter version which will make reference to the law issuer, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Initially, I expressed some reservation in using terrorism as it was revealed during the interpellation that there are at least 109 definitions of terrorism. However, with the assurance that terrorism will be adequately and appropriately described in the acts as listed in the measure, then I accept, Mr. President.
Yes, Mr. President, as we explained to the good sponsor, we are not defining terrorism as a phrase, but we are as a word, but we are defining it by the enumeration of the acts, which is the same concept as originally proposed by the good sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right.
I accept the amendment.
therefore, accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. You may proceed.
Okay, on page 2, lines 16 to 22. We delete line 16 to 22 and replace the same with the following. B, critical infrastructure shall refer to an asset or system, whether physical or virtual, so essential to the maintenance of vital societal function or the delivery of essential public services that the incapacity or destruction of such systems and assets would have a debilitating impact on national defense and security, national economy, public health or safety, the administration of justice, and other functions analogous thereto. It may include, but is not limited to, an asset or system affecting telecommunications, water and energy supply, emergency services, food security, fuel supply, banking and finance, transport, radio and television, information system, and technology, chemical, and industrial sectors. That is the end of the proposed amendment. And-
Why B?
Huh?
Why B? Why not A?
Because, I'm sorry, it should be A, Mr. President.
All right. Okay, thank
error.
you.
It should be, huh? Son?
Page 2,
Point.
Section 3, definition of terms. Presently, in our copy, it says A.
Nuclear sector, hindi yan.
Hindi,
Industrial po ang nasabi natin.
I'm sorry.
Yung A.
Um,
Letter A.
It should be, the last, second to last word should be neutral sectors, Mr. President. Huh? Nuclear, hindi sinasabi ko eh.
Nuclear.
Nuclear sector.
Nuclear sectors.
Kasasabi ko na.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, but the editorial amendment, it's letter A.
Letter A. That is
Letter
correct,
A,
Mr.
no, not
President.
letter B. All right? Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
All right, thank you, Mr. President. On page 5, page 5. On page 5, line 8, page 5, lines 8 and 9. We delete lines 8 and 9 on page 5 and replace with the following. Section 4, terrorism, period. Subject to Section 48 of this Act, comma, terrorism is committed by any person who, within or outside the Philippines, comma, regardless of the stage of execution, colon. And we retain the rest of the
Line 11 to
enumeration.
19.
Yes.
All right. What does the sponsor say?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection?
Except,
Uh-huh.
of course, are we tackling already letter C, Mr. President? Not yet.
No, no, no.
Only the first paragraph. Okay.
Yes, only the first line.
Accepted,
Line
Mr.
8.
President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 5, line 11, delete the words acts that may cause and replace the same with replace the same with, quote, engages in acts intended to cause. So that line 11 will now read, letter A, engages in acts intended to cause.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On line 12, add letter S at the end of the word endanger.
Endangers.
Endangers. Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
On line 13
Yeah.
of the same page, delete the phrase acts that may cause and replace the same with, quote, engages in acts intended to cause.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line
16.
16.
what? 14?
16. Letter C.
1 minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Po muna, delete lang po muna natin.
Baka meron siyang anterior.
Critical illness.
Letter.
Okay na yun sa B. Kaya 16 na talaga tayo.
Same page, line 14.
Hindi, C. Actually, C eh.
On the same, we're ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
On the same page, page 5, we propose to delete on line 14 the phrase critical infrastructure because we propose later on to create a separate paragraph for critical infrastructure.
Accepted, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Page 5, line 16. Okay. Still on page 5, lines 16 and 17. Delete line 16 to 17, starting with the word development until the phrase use of, and replace the same with, quote, develops, comma, manufactures, comma, possesses, comma, acquires, comma, transports, comma, supplies, or uses. End of the proposal. We submit, Mr. President.
I am inclined to accept, except that I will have to refer this to Senator Marcos because we have adopted the proposed amendment of Senator Marcos. We just would like to hear her comment,
Yes.
Mr. President.
Senator Marcos
This
is
is about
recognized.
CBRN.
Are you amenable to the proposed amendment? which
In principle, Mr.
slightly amends your proposed amendment.
Yes, in principle, Mr. President, I am, but subject to language and the inclusion and prioritizing of cyber terrorism.
Wala pa doon.
Wala pa tayo
pa
dyan.
lang ito.
Sa CBRN pa lang.
CBRN pa lang.
Okay.
Letter C pa lang.
It's about CBRN pa lang, wala pang cyber.
CBRN sa chemical biological pa lang po. Okay.
So, okay.
Oh, very,
Accepted, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted. It's retained. It's retained.
Running.
On the same page, line 17, delete the comma after the word weapons and insert the word or.
Saan na yun? Nawala na ako tuloy.
Or explosives.
Hindi, accept na natin. Accepted, Mr. President.
What about the next or? Are you going to amend that or? There must be an editorial amendment then.
Subject to style, Mr. President.
No.
Well, page, word after the third word or.
So, pa-continue natin.
Pwede na yung coma.
Kindly continue, Mr. President. Kasi
I-
naputol sa or.
Oo nga, hindi. Or lang eh. Ha?
Or,
Nasa or pa lang siya. Nasa or pa lang.
Oo.
no, well,
There is we need to edit this. Weapons or explosives or of biological, nuclear, it does not.
well, we are going to propose the deletion of the phrase or of biological, nuclear,
Yun.
radiological, or chemical weapons from 917 and
Are you going to replace it or not?
Dito na.
Are you going to propose to replace
yes,
it?
we're going to propose to delete that portion.
Yes, but will you replace it or not?
None, Mr.
Well,
None.
that is the problem of Senator Marcos. That's her amendment. That is her amendment.
Mr. President, in as much as it is in principle retained, I'm
We-
amenable
No,
to the
it's-
amendment. to the
We
amendment.
withdraw the amendment if it causes some difficulties.
Yeah, it will cause.
Yes, we're
difficulty.
withdrawing the amendment.
All right, the proposed amendment is withdrawn. You may proceed with the
Thank
next
you
one.
very much.
On the same page, after paragraph B, insert the following new paragraph as paragraph C, engages in acts intended to cause extensive interference with, comma, damage or destruction to critical infrastructure.
Accepted, Mr. President.
And therefore,
It becomes what? Letter what?
letter C. C, Mr. President. So letter C on line 16 becomes
Becomes
letter
D.
D.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Mr. President, letter C on on line 16 becomes letter D, and letter D
Becomes letter E.
Letter E.
becomes letter E.
All right.
Accepted, Mr. President.
All right. We place that on record. You may proceed.
Ano ito?
Ano kay Joel?
Style, purpose. Ano? Ha? Saan na tayo?
The same page, line 22.
Ha? Ano?
The same page.
All right. On line 22 of the same page, after the word intimidate, insert the words the general public, comma, or a segment thereof.
Line 21.
Line 21, after the word intimidate, insert the words the general public, comma, or a segment thereof.
Then continue on to
Put
the
in
word put.
fear. Yes. Yes.
I'm sorry?
Just inserting the phrase.
Well, yeah.
What does the sponsor say?
Kindly read again the proposed amendment, Mr. President.
Yes. On page
Page 20.
22, line, I'm sorry.
Page
li-
5.
Page 5, line
21.
22,
Line
21.
21.
line 21, after the word intimidate, comma, insert the words the general public, comma, or a segment thereof.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
On the same page, line 22, delete, I'm sorry, huh? 21? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. On the same page, line 21, delete the words put in and insert, and in each place, replace it with create an atmosphere or spread a message of fear.
An atmosphere of fear.
Create an atmosphere or spread a message of fear.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the same page, line 22, delete the phrase force or induce. Force or induce, and replace it with provoke or influence by intimidation.
To, what's the word again, sir?
Provoke or influence by intimidation.
To provoke. Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
On lines 20, nasaan nag-ikay ba ito? Ha? Ha?
Ano yung kay Joel?
Oh,
Provided.
23 to?
22 to 23.
On lines 22 to 23, delete the phrase or the public to do or abstain from doing any act. Allow us to explain this, Mr. President, because this is a substantial amendment. We are proposing to delete the phrase or the public to do or abstain from doing any act or seriously damage,
Or destroy.
something, doing any act, as this phrase makes it difficult to distinguish with political crimes under the revised penal code. We repeat that, Mr. President. The use of the phrase the use of the phrase or the public to do or abstain from doing any act will make this also an act of rebellion, and therefore the amendment are aimed to differentiate terrorism from coup d'etat, rebellion, and sedition. That is the only purpose, Mr. President.
Can you read now how it would look like from, how it would read from line 22, line 21 to 23?
Ang retain or seriously.
How will it read from
Stabilize
21
or
to
destroy.
23?
Let me,
Retain your
yes,
Kindly read again, Mr. President.
Yes, that's
Because I want to
right.
be clarified, if we are retaining the phrase or seriously destabilize or destroy the fundamental political,
yes, we are
economic.
retaining that, Mr. President.
Yes,
okay.
that's why. That's why we want to
We're
to
retaining
listen how it will come out.
Okay. We start from line 21 to read it. When the purpose of such act, comma, by its nature and conduct, comma,
Context.
I'm
Context.
sorry, by its nature and context, comma, is to intimidate the general public or a segment thereof, comma, create an atmosphere or send a message of fear, comma, provoke or influence by intimidation, comma, the government or any of its international organization, or
in.
seriously destabilize or destroy the fundamental political, economic, or social structures of the country, comma, create a public emergency or seriously undermine public safety shall be guilty of terrorism,
Committing terrorism.
of committing terrorism, and shall suffer the penalty of life imprisonment without the benefit of parole and the benefits of Republic Act 10592, semicolon,
Et cetera, et cetera.
provided
Okay.
that provided, I'm just reading, provided that terrorism as the, we can introduce this.
Yeah, later.
yes,
All right,
later.
right. All right. So, what does the sponsor say?
Accepted, but I would like to hear the comment of Senator Villanueva because he is the proponent of the proviso, Mr. President, provided that terrorist acts are as defined, etc., etc.
Pero mamaya pa yun eh. We're not there yet.
We're not there yet.
We're not there yet. We're still until line 24 pa lang.
Okay.
We're
Accepted,
still in line
accepted,
24.
Mr.
Accepted, subject to style. Huh? Subject to style because of the commas. Huh? Any objection? Hearing none.
All right,
Approved. Line 25.
line 25.
Terrorist act.
Terrorism.
Huh? Page. Dito pa rin. Huh? Yan dito saan? Saan?
28.
Huh? Ang terrorism, so hindi rin. 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Dito na, hindi na line. Mali naman tinuturo sa akin dito. We provided that. Yeah. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
On line 29, delete the following terrorist acts as defined under this section until the word others on the following page, on page 6. I repeat that, delete on page 5, starting with the word terrorist on line 29, up to others on page 6, line 2, and replace the same with the following. Terrorism as defined in this section shall not include advocacy, protest, dissent, stoppage of work, comma, industrial or mass action, comma, and other similar exercises of civil and political rights, comma, which are not intended to cause death or serious physical harm to a person, comma, to endanger a person's life, comma, or to create a serious risk to public safety.
I'm inclined to accept that this is the
Yes.
amendment introduced by Senator Villanueva, which we initially adopted, Mr. President. So we'd like to hear from Senator Villanueva.
Senator Villanueva is recognized.
President, thank you, distinguished sponsor. And upon consultation with the distinguished sponsor and upon hearing the statements and the amendments propounded by our distinguished minority floor leader, it looks to me that we are not deviating, Mr. President, with the intention of this particular provision, but because we are spelling out and detailing ito pong this particular provision. So I am amenable, Mr. President, and thank you.
All right. So, no objection from the proponent earlier. Are you accepting it?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. What do you do with the terrorist act in line 25? Are you changing that
To terrorism,
to terrorism? Mr.
as
Minority
proposed
Leader.
by Senator Drilon, Mr. President.
Yes,
Yes,
an omnibus amendment, Mr. President.
Ayun.
All
Okay.
references to terrorist acts will be replaced with terrorism.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Sana. Page
Line 6. Ano, page 6.
Page 6. Saan ba ito?
Page 7 po dito.
Ha? Page
7.
Threat to commit.
dito? Dito? On consistent with what we have just proposed as an omnibus amendment on line 4, terrorist acts on page 6, line 4, terrorist act
Alright.
is changed to
Sunod-sunod.
terrorism.
Sunod-sunod dyan, all sections. So omnibus
Yes.
carried already. All right.
And on line 6, the phrase "and 1 day to 20 years," we propose to have them deleted, and so that it is just 12 years.
Straight 12 years. Accepted, Mr. President.
For the record, this is to
Yes,
standardize the penalties.
Same rationale in the previous proposed amendment. All right, any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On line 25. On line 25, delete the phrase 8 years and 1 day too. So it will now read, proposal to commit terrorism. A person who proposes to commit terrorism, as defined in Section 4 hereof, shall suffer the penalty of imprisonment of 12 years.
Accepted, Mr.
12.
President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
All right. On Section 9, first, again, terrorist act should simply read terrorism, and we propose to reword Section 9 as follows. Any person who, without taking any direct part in the commission of terrorism, shall incite others to the execution of any of the acts specified in article hereof by means of speeches, proclamations, writings, emblems, banners, or other representations tending to the same end, comma, shall suffer the penalty of imprisonment of 12 years.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
Sunod. Line. Huh?
Ito na yung susunod.
On page 7, line 9. Line 9 ba? Sorry. I'm sorry. On page 7, line 5, instead of 26 appearing on line 5, it should be 27.
Kanila pong amendment.
It is already stated
Okay.
in the
I'm sorry.
latest copy, Mr. President.
Yes, this is your, okay, yes. Now, insert before line 9, we propose this amendment, insert before line 9 the following. The same penalty shall be imposed on any person who organizes or facilitates the travel of individuals to a state other than their state of residence or nationality for the purpose of recruitment, which may be committed through any of the following means. Number 1, letter I, recruiting another person to serve in any capacity in or with an armed force in a foreign state, whether the armed force forms part of the armed forces of the government of that foreign state or otherwise, semicolon. Double I, publishing an advertisement or propaganda for the purpose of recruiting persons to serve in any capacity in or with such an armed force, semicolon, triple I, publishing an advertisement or propaganda containing any information relating to the place at which or the manner in which persons may make applications to serve or obtain information relating to service in any capacity in or with such armed force, or relating to the manner in which persons may travel to a foreign state for the purpose of serving in any capacity in or with such armed force, semicolon, or I5, performing any other act with the intention of facilitating or promoting the recruitment of persons to serve in any capacity or with such armed force. And then,
Did you say 5, Mr. President? Should be 4, Mr. President. Roman,
I don't know.
after
Yeah, Roman
I,
numeral
victory,
4, yeah.
IV, yeah.
Is it accepted, Mr. President?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Is that the usual practice? You use I instead of numbers?
Yes, Mr. President.
And IV
Okay.
as
IV.
4. Huh?
IV, instead
All
of.
right.
Yes.
All right. Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
We are now on page 7, Mr. President, line 11, sorry, section 11 on line 16. Instead of foreign terrorist, we say terrorist travel. So that, yes.
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Yung penalty po here sa previous section, hindi niya po na-mention amendment is 3 penalties. Kasi atin po, 8 years, 1 year to 12.
Pero omnibus na rin yan, di ba?
Yung penalty po, sir, wala pa po 1 year. Sir, kasi nakala ko nga po. Yun lang.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Can we restate the proposed amendments on page 8? Page 8.
Page 8, huh?
8. I'm sorry. 7.
Page 7.
7. Page 7. Line 13. Delete the phrase 8 years and 1 day too. So
All right.
the imprisonment is 12
12
years.
years. All right. Then, what's the sponsor say?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
Okay, we withdraw the amendment on line
16.
16.
16. So we retain the present wording, foreign terrorists.
All right.
On page 8, I'm sorry, on page 7, page 7, about page 8.
Page 8, providing material support to terrorists. That's page 8. Are you amending that?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
So,
Page 7.
kasi doon na napunta sa
Okay.
mem. So period na sa training.
Okay. Section, page 7. How about these other ones? So, ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Still on page 7, line 29, starting the phrase including acts of until line 31. Delete that phrase as we have transposed this in an earlier section.
So a period after training.
Yeah.
All right.
So-
Semicolon. Should be
So-
semicolon.
Semicolon.
Yes. So,
Oh yes, semicolon.
yes, semicolon. So we delete the phrase on line 29,
All the way to
including
31.
acts of recruitment that may be committed through any of the following means, and then the semicolon after training, Mr. President.
What
Up
does the
to
sponsor say?
line 31.
Yes. We have,
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
on,
Hindi, sinakop niya
Saan?
ng page 8. Hanggang line 30.
okay, dito, ito. All right, on page 8, delete lines 1 to 17, as this was transposed to
Yes.
another section.
I expected that. Yeah, 1 to 17.
Yes,
Transpose under section 10.
yes. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Accepted.
It's already in section 10 or you're inserting it in section 10?
It's already in section
In
10.
section 10. All
It's in
right,
section
accepted.
10.
Any objection? Adopted.
Ano, ito, travel to Windows, wala na ito? All right. Okay. So, wala na. Line 12 na. Is that section 12? Okay. On
Yung isa na, markahan ko na.
section 12,
Materials.
on providing material support to terrorists, we propose to delete knowingly, because a matter of style, as
Okay, so ganyan kanya, di ba? Yung knowing.
it's also referred to in line 27, known, etc., etc. So it's just a matter of style. Mr.
So, line 25, knowingly.
Yes, we're not changing anything, matter of style.
Any person who
Provides.
The word
who
knowingly.
provides- Yeah,
removed knowingly.
that's correct,
All right.
because it is also found in the subsequent,
On line 27, or should have known.
saan?
Any person who provides material support to any terrorist individual, terrorist organization, or group person.
Okay. And just to complete this amendment, on the same page, page 8, line 27, delete the phrase, or who should have known, and replace the same with knowing.
Yeah,
Knowing.
Better, Mr.
Alright.
President, accepted.
All right, so remove knowingly, and on line 27, make it knowing, replacing or should have known. Any objection? Accepted, adopted.
On page 9, line 14, delete the word, huh? Huh? Hirap na hirap. 1 minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Section 14.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Ano? Tama ba yan?
Sir, iba po yan, accessory. Accomplice po pa lang tayo. Doon pa lang po tayo sa next page po. Page 13.
Ito, ano? On page 8. Huh?
We propose to delete lang po.
Page 9.
Saan?
Yes, sir. Page 9, section 14, we propose to delete. Ito lang.
Page 9,
We propose to delete this in there.
because,
Yan po yun. Because the penalty is the same.
huh?
Because we want to, whether you're an accomplice or an accessory, you're punished in the same way. You're still a derelict.
Ito yung bill na napakadapit sa papel.
Mr. President, on line, on page 9,
9.
page 9, lines 5 to 10. Page 9, lines 5 to 10.
Accomplice.
We propose to delete this provision because any person who participates or cooperates in the execution of the crimes of terrorism under Section 4 is guilty of terrorism. We note that a person who provides material support to terrorists are liable as principals. Therefore, there is no reason why a person who actually cooperated in the execution of the acts should be punished with a penalty lower than life imprisonment.
Better, Mr. President,
Yes,
accepted.
you do not want a second-class criminal. All right, accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
Can, 1 minute suspension, can we have the aircon?
The aircon?
Very hot.
Why, is Senator Legarda here? May we have a minute suspension and ask that the air conditioner be...
Huh?
Si Lori na hiling magpahina niyan eh.
Oh, ano na? Line,
Bukas niyo, bukas niyo.
line. Accomplice, oh. Tapos na tayo sa accomplice.
Hindi, hindi.
Pero pinapa-manifest lang po the number accordingly.
Ito. Didelete na naman ito. Oh, so, renumbering lang. Nawala na yung accomplice. Accessory na.
Are you ready?
Ready to resume, Mr. President?
Session resumed.
All right, we just, a matter of style, please renumber the provisions with the deletion of
Section
lines
14,
5 to
the new
to
section
10.
14, yes.
Section-
All right, sorry numbered.
All right,
To avoid confusion, can we, for the purpose of discussion, we just refer to the old numbering, Mr. President? In the meantime,
In the meantime, yes. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the ones
There
you
will be no
have on
confusion.
as of February 18.
yes,
As of February 18.
yes, I agree, Mr. President.
All right.
On page 9, line 14, delete the word And as a matter of style, on line 14, just to continue, on page 9, lines 14 and 15, after the words therein, delete the following phrase. Quote, either as principal or accomplished under section 17 and 18 of the revised penal code. On the same page, line 21, delete 10 years and 1 day, 2. On the same page, lines 22 to 23 and up to 9, and up to page 9A, lines 24 to 25.
Delete.
And yes, and replace the same with the following. No person, regardless of relationship or affinity, shall be exempt from liability under this section.
Accepted, Mr. President.
All right, adopted.
Okay?
9A.
Sunod. Page 12. We now turn to page 12, line
Page 12.
32. All right. We add on page 12 the following as line 32, etc. Line 32. Insert the following. If no case is filed within the 30-day period, comma, the applicant, law enforcement, or military official shall immediately notify the person subject of the surveillance, interception, and recording of the termination of said surveillance, comma, interpretation and recording, period.
Interception.
Huh?
Interception.
Interception and recording. The penalty of imprisonment of 6 years shall be imposed upon the applicant, law enforcement, or military official who fails to notify the person subject of the surveillance, monitoring, interception, and recording, comma, as specified above, period. For purposes of this provision, the issuing court shall require the applicant, law enforcement, or military official to inform the court after the lapse of the 30-day period of the fact that an appropriate case for violation of this act has been filed with the public prosecutor's office. If no such case has been filed, said applicant or law enforcement or military official shall be required within the same period to inform the issuing court that the person subject of the surveillance, interception, and recording has been notified of the termination thereof.
We have expressed, or we are expressing some reservation on the proposed amendment simply because we conferred with some law enforcement officials, and they maintain that there might be some sleeper cells. That if we inform the person, the subject of the surveillance after the lapse of the 60-day or the 90-day period, including the extension, there may be sleeper cells that can still operate, Mr. President, and they could be warned by the person who was subject of the surveillance, Mr. President.
So the objection is on the first paragraph?
Informed.
Huh?
The notification or first paragraph shall immediately notify the person subject of the surveillance, interception, and
Yes,
recording
yes.
of the terminal.
If no case, in other words, if no case is filed within the 30-day period, the applicant, law enforcement shall immediately notify, etc., etc.
If we can just do away with the notification for the reason that I had advanced earlier, Mr. President. This is an appeal from the
Yes.
law enforcement officers.
We maintain the second paragraph.
Except the last portion. It's okay to inform the issuing court,
Yes.
but the phrase that the person subject of the surveillance, interception,
also
and
be-
recording has been notified of the termination
Okay,
thereof.
so we, the first paragraph is not accepted. We're withdrawing the first paragraph, Mr. President.
All right.
Informing the court is fine with us, Mr. President.
Informing the court. Yes. We retain the first sentence of the second paragraph and delete the remaining, the second paragraph.
Perhaps you're pertaining to starting from for purposes of this provision.
Yes, for-
all the way to been filed, period. Hindi.
No, no,
hindi.
office.
Court
Office.
If you just read the second paragraph, we'll read. For purposes of this provision, comma, the issuing court shall require the applicant law enforcement or military official to inform the court after the lapse of the 30-day period of the fact that an appropriate case has been, appropriate case for violation of this act has been filed with the public prosecutor's office. That's all, Mr. President. The other proposed amendments are withdrawn.
All right, all right.
Yeah, much appreciated. Thank you very much. Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
On page 13, line 18. 13, line
18.
18, delete the phrase "and 1 day to 12 years."
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
No, 6 years, starting with 6 years. And
6
one,
years.
Imprisonment of 6 years, period.
Period.
He wants 6 years.
Yes.
He's removing the 1 day
12
to 12
years.
years, yes. Are you accepting that? We thought you
Mr.
did, that's why
President.
we adopted.
Just for uniformity and consistency, can we retain the 10 years? Just to be uniform, Mr. President.
Okay, so
So we reconsider the just amended line.
so that the proposal on line 17 is to delete 6 years, and on line 18, 1 day to 12 years. And in lieu of that, imprisonment of 10 years.
10 years.
Imprisonment of 10 years, period.
Period.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Any
Accepted.
objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 14, Mr. President.
Nothing on 13A, 14.
14 line, page 14, line 6, delete the phrase 8 years and 1 day to 10 years, and replace the same with 6 years.
Can we make it 10
Disposition.
years, Mr. President? Again,
Remove the
for-
phrase 8 years and 1 day to 10 years, and replace that period with 6 years.
He's proposing a much lower
Much lower penalty.
penalty of 6 years.
Never mind.
This is on disposition of deposited materials.
This is the subject of our discussion with Senator Pangilinan, Mr. President.
And
And we agreed on
Ano,
10 years
What?
to make it consistent with the other violations of law enforcement officers, Mr. President.
Okay, we have no, so what is the proposed
10
penalty?
years?
10 years.
How many?
So we,
12?
10 years.
10
So we
years.
can remove 8 until 2. From the word 8 to the word 2 on line 23, 24. So it shall read, penalized by imprisonment of 10 years. Words and numbers, words and figures.
Whenever a violation of a law enforcement officer is involved, we just want to retain 10 years, Mr. President, as an added safeguard, as proposed by Senator Pangilinan.
Okay.
Okay?
Sen-
Is that acceptable? Amendment
10
to the
years.
amendment? All right? Okay. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Consistent with that, Mr. President, on line 6 on page 14, delete the phrase "and 1 day to 12 years."
All right.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted. Page 15.
Page 15. Page 15, line 7. On page 16, line 7, delete the phrase "and 1 day to 12 years" on line 7 and on line 8.
Page 15, line 7.
Line 7 and line 8, delete the phrase "and
And
1 day to 12 years." So it will just stay at 10
10
years.
years. All right. What does the sponsor say?
Where are we now, Mr. President? Page
Page 15, line 7
Page
to 8.
15.
7 to 8. Accepted, Mr. President.
All right. Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
On page 15A.
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 Wala tayong 15A. May 15A ba
Saan yan?
tayo?
Saan ang 15A?
Ito.
Ha? Wala tayo
Mr.
15.
President, before
Yes.
before proceeding to 15A, I recall Senator Pangilinan wanted to reinstate the provision under 9372 on unauthorized or malicious interceptions and no recordings. Because I accepted the proposed amendment subject to style, Mr. President, I would like to ask Senator Pangilinan to submit the proposed amendment so we can harmonize it with the other provisions, Mr. President.
That's on line 15, still
Section
on
25,
Section 25,
Unauthorized
26.
or malicious interceptions, because he was proposing to
25.
notify the person, the subject of surveillance, if there are illegal or malicious interceptions. That would be tantamount to violating the principle of against self-incrimination, Mr. President. Because if we will notify, the police officer will notify the subject of the surveillance due to illegal interception or recording of communication, it might amount to that, Mr. President. So I'd like to clarify the specific amendment to be submitted by Senator Pangilinan, but since he is not here,
What is this highlighted line on line 8 to line 8A? All information that have been maliciously procured should be made available to the aggrieved party.
Yan mo ito.
Isn't this the
it
subject
is found
of?
on
Section
page 15, line 8, Mr. President.
Oh,
All information that have been maliciously procured should be made available to the aggrieved party.
yes.
Ito.
This is now incorporated in our February 18 copy.
That is correct, Mr. President.
So is this the Pangilinan amendment?
Before the...
But we want to be clarified the intent of this proposed amendment. Because while I accepted the proposed amendment, I also indicated that it should be subject to style. Because my understanding when he introduced the amendment is that after the court has been informed and all the materials can be disposed of, that's the time that the person may be informed of, say, if a particular number is subject or has been subject of wiretapping, and the law enforcement officer included another mobile number, then that is tantamount to malicious or illegal.
Ito.
But the point is,
Ito.
who will determine if the person was subjected to illegal wiretapping, Mr. President? And we should not require the law enforcement officer to submit to the aggrieved party or to the person who was subject of the interception of communication, the information.
I see the point, but the proposed line here, which is highlighted, was this introduced during that time, or this is?
It was introduced, but I accepted conditionally, Mr. President. I said subject to style.
Ano to? Ito yung ano? Ito yung
So we have to clarify,
Well,
Mr.
according
President.
to the Secretariat, this was the subject to style. This is styled based on the talk between the proposed amendment of Senator Pangilinan and the sponsor. This is how they would want it, this is how they worded it.
Yes, Mr. President.
And then you do not accept this?
We would like to be clarified on the intent of the amendment of Senator Pangilinan.
All right. Ano ba Senator Pangilinan? All right. We can probably table this and
Yes,
ask
Mr.
Senator
President.
Pangilinan to join us here in the hall.
So we can proceed with the amendments of Senator Drilon in the
Yeah.
meantime.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Sponsor, we go now to page 16. Our amendment on page 16 is on line 2. Delete the phrase I'm sorry. Central Regional Trial Court.
Before a competent regional trial court.
Yan na nga. Line-
Yan yung papalitan niya na CA.
Ito. On page 16, line 2, delete the phrase competent regional trial court and replace the same with authorizing division of the Court of Appeals. The reason, Mr. President, is the order of prescription has very serious consequences, and in all of the provisions here, it is always the designated division of the Court of Appeals. So just for consistency, we propose that instead of the RTC, it should be the Court of Appeals. That is also the present system insofar as the anti-money laundering law is concerned.
So you want to replace competent regional trial court with
Authorizing division of the Court of
Before-
Appeals.
before
Before,
the DOJ, before...
after before,
Yeah nga. Of the DOJ before...
with due notice.
Yes, I mean, I was reading the word before.
Yes.
So you want to use an article "an" instead of "a"?
Yes, okay. Before,
right.
no. Before the competent.
Okay. Replace "a"
Yes.
also. A competent regional trial court, remove that and replace it with the.
Authorizing
The
division
authorized.
of the Court of Appeals.
All right.
I have
What
no
does the
problem
sponsor
with that,
say?
except that I would just like to remind the minority leader that also included under the proposed measure is the designation by the Supreme Court of special courts.
I'm sorry?
It is not any RTC, Mr. President.
Yes, we are aware of that. So with that, Mr. President, can we ask for the approval of our proposed amendment on line
What
2?
does the sponsor say?
With grudgingly, Mr. President, accepted.
With a grieving heart, he has accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On line 5, Mr. President, on the same page, the heart of the sponsor need not bleed because this is on the same subject. Just delete respondent, regional trial, so that it will just say by the said court.
Accepted,
By
Mr.
the said
President.
court, yeah, that will suffice on the, as far as the sponsor is concerned. Accepted. Any objection? Adopted. The
Mr.
majority
President,
leader.
no.
Yes.
Mr. President, with the permission of Senator Drilon, I was approached by one of our colleagues that she has a proposal, Senator Marcos, an ulterior amendment earlier and on the earlier pages.
Anterior
So,
amendment.
Anterior amendment. So, at the right time, with the permission of Senator Drilon, para hindi na magkagulo po, ibabalikan natin.
Wow.
Maybe we can recognize her as well. With the permission of the two gentlemen.
What page is this?
Yes, earlier on.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Yes, by the sufferance of Senator Drilon, who clearly has the floor. I have been waiting for the mention of cybercrime and
And what page is that?
cyber
contained?
terrorism. There is no mention as I see it, although I wanted clarification from Senator Lacson if indeed it was included. It was originally under section 11 and 12. I was told that it's included under critical infrastructure, Section 3A. But to my mind, that definition is grossly inadequate, given that cyber terrorism is the prime mode of the commission of this crime today. It only indicates that critical infrastructure should be felt, including information services. I think that is grossly inadequate given the attacks that we suffer that result in violence against non-combatant targets, that glorify terrorists with staged beheadings on Facebook. That is a prime method of recruitment that tends to sow and create a condition of fear and panic among the populace. Kung sana tatanggapin ni Senator Lacson na may sarili ng provision yung cyber terrorism.
Where do you propose to place it, and maybe hear the proposal? On what particular?
The inclusion was originally under Section 11 and 12. Because Section 11, I had hoped would be inserted after Section 10 to define CBRN, and Section 12, a new Section 12, to define cyber terrorism. So I'd just like to clarify with Senator Lacson if those were acceptable, since CBRN was mentioned earlier, but I was assured cyber terrorism would be included at some point in time. But we're already towards the end, and defining penalties and jurisdiction, we are not yet there.
So the proposal, if the sponsor will look into it, would be on page 7,
Opo.
after section 10,
Opo.
and new section 11.
A new Section 11
And
for
the title
CBRN.
is?
And the title would be CBRN terrorism po, as well as cyber terrorism, depending upon the sponsor's wisdom.
So would you like it incorporated in one section, or?
Separate section.
Up to you po.
Although under the definition of Senator Drilon, he made mention of information systems and technology, which is more encompassing, Mr. President, than just cyber.
My concern po is the use of cyber terrorism in the glorification of criminals, the Facebook beheadings that are used for recruiting terrorists, the fake news that spreads all sorts of rumors throughout the population that panics everyone, and certainly the system that coerces government or institution. This does not include the felling of an entire information structure, which is what is considered traditionally. But the untraditional and new methods of terrorism, such as the drone attack, the drone assassination, where clearly cyber terror and the use of digital and electronic technology was essential to the commission of the crime. I think this need to be encompassed.
Yeah. Can we ask for some time to review this, because it might affect the freedom of expression as guaranteed under the Constitution. So
Certainly,
yeah.
certainly po. But provided we give some priority to cyber terrorism, because that's clearly the way of the uncertain terrorist future.
Yeah, well taken, Mr. President. Just give us some time to just review, so we can be assured that we are not running afoul the provision of the Constitution, Mr. President.
All right, then we will be having 2 points to review. One is found in section, or in page 15, which is the proposal of Senator Pangilinan, which we cannot determine today, and the proposal of Senator Marcos, which will have to be found in section 10, after section 10 on page 7. So in the meantime, we will ask the sponsor to review both proposals.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, our sponsor, as well, of course, as our distinguished minority leader, for your sufferance and forbearance. I will also do my very best to come up with language that
yes,
abides closely by the Constitution.
It might be easier if you will submit to the sponsor already the proposed amendment later on.
Yes, Mr. President, I've
Section 10
actually
Section
submitted
11
in
is
writing, but I will
Yes, yes,
review.
please. All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you. Minority Leader, you may
Yes.
continue. We were still on page 16.
Still on page 16.
Yes.
On line 11, delete the phrase regional trial, consistent with the amendment in the preceding lines. Delete the phrase regional trial on line 11.
Okay. What does the sponsor say?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
On line 12, delete the words judge.
Sponsor?
So, We
that all?
delete the whole phrase regional trial court judge, Mr. President.
No, he is retaining court.
What? Yes, retaining
Ah.
court.
Where the court?
Okay, accepted, Mr. President.
All right, any objection? Adopted.
On line 13, after the word substance, on line 13, insert the following, that the issuance of an order of prescription is necessary to prevent the commission of terrorism.
Yeah.
That the issuance, yeah. So it will now read, where the court has determined that probable cause exists on the basis of the verified application, which is sufficient in form and substance, that the issuance of an order of prescription is necessary to prevent the commission of terrorism,
Clarify lang natin.
Comma.
comma,
He slash
he
she shall.
slash
All
shall,
right.
comma, within 72 hours after the filing of the application, issue a preliminary order of prescription declaring the respondent as a terrorist and an outlawed organization or association within the meaning of Section 27 of this Act.
Declaring that the respondent is a terrorist, as a terrorist, both acceptable, subject to style. What does the sponsor say?
May we be clarified on the word necessary, Mr. President? Necessary to prevent?
No, that the order of prescription is necessary to prevent the commission of terrorism. Let me read the sentence so for clarity. Section 28, preliminary order of prescription, period, where the court has determined that probable cause exists on the basis of the verified application, which is sufficient in form of substance, that the issuance of an order of prescription is necessary to prevent the commission of terrorism.
Accepted, Mr. President. Are you withdrawing the word prima facie and
No.
not?
No.
So
It's
you're
still,
lowering
no,
the threshold?
it's still, I'm just reading probable cause, although, in other words, yes, we're no.
So you're no longer introducing,
No more.
no more. Okay, Mr. President. Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, any
So
objection?
it's still based on probable cause, Mr. President?
Yes.
Okay,
Adopted.
thank you, Mr. President.
On the same page, delete lines 17 to 21. And replace the same with the following. The court shall conduct continuous hearings, comma,
Okay to.
which should be completed within 6 months from the time the application has been filed, comma, to determine whether, the preliminary order of prescription should be made permanent, semicolon. Letter B, open and close parentheses, a permanent order of prescription should be issued in case no preliminary order was issued, semicolon, or C, a preliminary order of prescription should be lifted. It shall be the burden of the applicant to prove that the respondent is a terrorist and and an outlawed organization or association within the meaning of Section 26 of this Act before the court issues an order of proscription, whether preliminary or permanent.
As of now, Section 27.
Provided that we follow the renumbering later on, Mr. President,
Yes.
accepted.
Yes, accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On the page, the same page, line 22, insert the word permanent before proscription.
Order of permanent
The
prescription.
order of permanent proscription.
What does the sponsor say?
Huh?
Not the permanent order. Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
On page 17, this is on detention without judicial warrant of arrest. So you charged with. Okay. On page 17, line 5, delete the phrase charged with or.
Taking custody of a person suspected of committing any of the acts.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 17, line 10, delete charged or.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On page 17, line 20, delete charged with or.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
On the same page, line 12,
12.
12.
on the same page, page 17, line 12, place a period after the word personnel and insert the following phrase. The period of detention may be extended to a maximum period of 10 calendar days.
If it is
Accepted, Mr. President.
accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Bakit tuwang-tuwa ka doon, Mr. Okay, so on the same page, line 16, delete the semicolon after the word delay and the phrase provided that the hanggang saan to? Hold on, 1 minute suspension.
Session suspended.
Okay, we say
A
delete
petition, ano?
hanggang, the same page, delete the word, the semicolon after delay and the phrase provided. Ito. Ito, the whole 15, 16 to 19. Ito.
Hindi ko naman sundan yung train of thought.
It will be a period. Ready to resume, Mr. President. On page 17,
Resume. Go ahead.
page 17, line 16, replace the semicolon after the word delay with a period and delete the rest of the sentence until line 19 because that we with the word order as the previous amendment was already accepted.
Yes.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
On
Page 18.
yeah. On page 18, line Ano? Line 1, oh. What? On line 1, delete the phrase "and 1 day to 12 years."
10 years. Accepted, Mr. President.
Any, hearing no objection, adopted.
Tapos na? Huh? Line 26. Matter of style on line 26, delete the phrase "penalty for." The title of the provision there shall just read "violation of the rights of a detainee."
All right, yes.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
On line 27, delete the phrase "and 1 day to 12 years."
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
Oh, ano pa? Huh? Page 19. Ano? Lapit na ito siguro. Huh?
Page
Line
19.
4. Okay. On page 19, line 4, matter of style, delete the phrase "requirement for an." The title should simply be "official, custodial,
yeah.
logbook, and its contents."
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
On page 19, line 5 and 6, delete the phrase "charged with or."
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
On page 20, line 9, replace replace the phrase 10 years and 1 day to 12 years with the phrase 6 years in words and in figures.
10 years? 10
Six
years
ang-
or 12 years,
six.
Mr. President?
6 ang proposal niya.
Okay, so with
Consistency.
okay, just for consistency, instead of on line 9, it should be
10 years.
10 years.
And remove "and"
Yes.
to 12 years. All right. Sponsor?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Adopted.
Okay. On page 20. Yes. Senator Risa has an interior amendment.
Senator Tiveros, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. With the indulgence of the good sponsor and the good minority leader, I would like to propose an anterior amendment on page 17. My mistake, Mr. President. On page 16, I would like to propose that on page 16, line 21, to make a further amendment to the amendment proposed by the minority leader and accepted by the good sponsor, that it would now read, "The court shall immediately commence and conduct continuous hearings," so on and so forth.
This was deleted. Page 16, line 17 to 21 has been deleted by
Yes,
the
Mr. President.
minority
Already
leader.
deleted.
Yes, Mr. President. And then he proposed an amendment, which if I recall correctly, was accepted by the good sponsor, which as of now reads, "The court shall conduct continuous hearing." If I remember correctly, good sponsor.
Yes, that is correct, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr.
Wow.
President. If that is correct, then I wish to propose an anterior amendment further to this accepted amendment that would now read, "The court shall immediately commence and conduct continuous hearing," and so on and so forth. I so move, Mr.
Saan
President.
insert yun? What page? Anong page yun?
Page 16, Mr. President. Line 21. Replacing the previous lines 17 to 21.
Walang problema. Yeah. With the permission of Senator Rilon, the sponsor accepts, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr.
No
President.
objection, Mr. President.
Thank you, good
All right,
sponsor. Thank you,
accepted,
Minority Leader.
adopted.
Salamat po.
Going back to page 20.
20.
20.
Yes. Page 20, we are now on section 35, restriction of the right to travel. On line 20, page 20, line 22. Page 20, line 22. Insert the word investigating before prosecutor and delete the phrase handling the case. Matter of style, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Any objection? Adopted.
On line 24, after PHDO, insert a comma and the phrase upon a preliminary determination of probable cause in the proper regional trial court.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Adopted.
And delete the phrase in accordance with the Supreme Court rule on PHDO. Matter of style, it is presumed that the PHDO is in accordance with the Supreme Court rules issued.
Accepted, Mr. President.
So your proposal comes after respondent.
Yes.
All right. Accepted. Adopted.
Page 21. Huh?
Page 21.
Page 21. Okay. On line 19, delete the title. Huh? Sorry?
Yeah.
Sorry. Page 21.
Iniba niya Anti-Money Laundering Council.
Huh? Page 21. Line.
Hindi doon. Line 20, sa section 30.
Hindi pa ito. Diba? Ha? Hindi pa.
Pero, tiga.
Saan?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session
Okay,
suspended.
sorry. On page 21, Mr. President.
The sponsor asked for a minute suspension.
Ito na.
You ready?
Ready to resume?
Session resumed.
On page 21, line 14, delete the phrase, quote, to cancel the passport of the accused, close quote, and replace it with the following, to initiate the procedure for the cancellation of the passport of the accused.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Adopted.
Line what? On page 21, still, line 19, change the title to Anti-Money Laundering Council Authority to investigate, inquire into, and examine bank deposits.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted. Adopted.
On page 23, line 11, the provision on Republic Act 9372 or the Human Security Act is being deleted in the bill. We propose to reinstate the amendment on section 37, malicious examination, which I'll read as follows. Malicious examination of a bank or a financial institution. Period. Any person who maliciously or without authorization examines deposits, placements, trust accounts, assets, or records in a bank or financial institution in relation to Section 36 shall suffer the penalty of 4 years.
Accepted, Mr. President. 4 years.
simply
Hindi, any person for you.
suffer the penalty of 4 years?
Huh? This is in line with the Bank Secrecy Law, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President. And since this is a new provision, a new section, I move to renumber the succeeding sections, Mr. President.
All right, subject to style. Any objection? Adopted.
On line 12 of page 23, remove the phrase,
Diba? Dapat.
remove the word provision, matter of style, the safe harbor, it should be the title of the measure, and
Before you continue, it bothers me. When you say shall suffer the penalty of 4 years, 4 years of what? 4 years of massage or 4 years of
penalty
imprisonment?
of 4 years imprisonment. Sorry, Mr.
Imprisonment,
President.
all right.
Four
Thank
years
you.
of joy.
He can also be the Senate President for 4 years. It's the same penalty.
Yes. So imprisonment, adopted.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, you,
Yes.
please proceed.
On line 12 to 14, we'll just read the provision as follows now. Safe harbor. No administrative, criminal, or civil proceeding shall lie against any person acting in good faith when implementing the targeted financial sanctions as provided under pertinent United Nations Security Resolution.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
I was just tempted to say earlier that when 3 people of the same age discuss, when 2 forget, 1 remembers.
Agreed.
Agree. Meron pa. Next will be line,
Still page 23.
still on page 23. Line 16, delete the word penalty of.
All right.
Matter of style.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
On page 23, line 20, after section, insert the word 26, and after section,
So it
insert the
becomes with
word
section 26 and 27.
Subject to the renumbering, Mr. President.
renumbering,
Accepted.
yes,
Okay, renumbering. Subject to renumbering.
yes.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Immunity.
On page 23, still on the same page, line 21, replace 10 years and 1 day to 12 years with 4 years.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, adopted.
Still on the same page, line 23, after the title, insert the immunity and protection of government witnesses shall be governed by, I'll just read the whole
Et cetera,
sentence.
et cetera, yeah.
The immunity and protection of government witnesses. The immunity and protection of government witnesses shall be governed by the provisions of Republic Act 6981, otherwise known as the Witness Protection, Security, and Benefits Act. We are, and then delete the rest of the sentence. The provisions of the Witness Protection and Security and Benefits Act is more liberal and in application rather than Section 17 and 18 of Rule 119. And this is because under the Witness Protection Security and Benefits Act, it is the Secretary of Justice who can determine who are the witnesses without and exclude the proposed witnesses from the filing of the information. Under Rule 119, Section 17 and 18 of the revised Rules of Court, it is the court who will have to rule, and that ruling is subject to appeal. And therefore, to strengthen the prosecution, instead of basing it on the rules of court, we should base it on the Witness Protection Program.
What does the
Accepted.
sponsor say?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
Oh, on page 24, on page 24, lines 7 to 8, delete 12 years and 1 day to 20 years and replace it with 6 years.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
The proposed measure on page 24, line 5. We propose to reinstate Section 44 of the Human Securities Act on infidelity in the custody of the detained person. We propose to reinstate with amendments the deleted Section 44, and it will read as follows. Section blank, infidelity in the custody of detained persons. Any public officer who has direct custody of a detained person under the provisions of this act, and who, by his deliberate act, misconduct, or inexcusable negligence, causes or allows the escape of such detained person, shall be guilty of an offense and shall suffer the penalty of how many? 10? 10 years of imprisonment if the detained person has already been convicted and sentenced in a final judgment of a competent court, and B, imprisonment, 2 years? 6 years of imprisonment if the detained person has not been convicted and sentenced in a final judgment of a competent court.
What does the sponsor say?
Accepted.
So there is a distinction between a detained person who has already been convicted, infidelity, committing infidelity in the custody, of a person that has already been convicted and a person that has not been convicted. So there are two levels of punishment. Is that the suggestion, Mr. President?
This is basically a provision of the revised penal code, Mr. President. The distinction is in the revised penal code. We just followed it.
Just follow the distinction in the RPC.
Yes.
Well, this is an improvement because in the revised penal code, the fidelity in custody of a prisoner is very light.
Very light.
Yes.
But my concern, Mr. President, is a terrorist, regardless of whether he has been convicted or is still undergoing trial, may be potentially a threat to
Escape.
humanity, Mr. President.
Yeah, that's why. So, what do you think?
My proposal is to impose the same penalty, whether or not, regardless of having been, or the status of the case, Mr. President.
Kung detained or kung
Convicted or
convicted na.
otherwise, my suggestion is to impose the same penalty because of
Mr.
the gravity of
President,
the offense.
We should consider that this is a penalty on the police officer
Custodian.
who has custody, and to impose life imprisonment may be a
Not
light,
that, Mr. President.
Not life, lighter.
lighter. No, I thought he
Baka,
said
wag daw mas magaan.
Not that, Mr. President. There should be no distinction in an inexcusable release of a prisoner who has been convicted and who is still undergoing trial.
okay.
Whether detained or convicted.
Okay.
Pareho, basta.
So-
A similar penalty should be imposed on the
okay.
custodian who deliberately released a person, a suspected
Okay.
terrorist, undergoing trial.
So there is no distinction between a detention prisoner and a convicted
And a
prisoner
convicted,
insofar as
felon.
infidelity is concerned.
That
We
is
have
correct,
no
Mr.
objection to that amendment.
All right.
And we can place probably 10 years.
10 years.
10 years. All right,
Yes.
subject to style, accepted. Accepted, sponsor?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, adopted.
I just move to renumber again the
Yes.
Yes, this will probably be
Senator.
the new section 43 instead. Subject of
Page,
renumbering.
okay.
All right.
We turn now to page
Page
24.
24 pa rin?
Huh? Anti-Terrorism Council,
Yes.
What
line
page?
17, on page 24.
24. Anti-Terrorism Council?
Binawasan.
Okay? The proposal will, the amendment will delete, saan ba? On page, on line 23, to line 28. Ito?
23 to 28.
Dito? With the number 16. So from lines 23, starting with the Secretary of Science and Technology up to up to number 16. So the ninth member is the Executive Director of the Anti-Money Laundering Council, Secretariat. We do not see really the need to have this many, especially the Secretary of Science and Technology, the Secretary of
Yes.
Labor,
So
Secretary
you're
of
removing
Transportation.
all from
Yes. Yes.
from number 9, Secretary
Yes.
of Science Technology, all the way to BARM end on line 28.
And 16.
And yeah, making number 16 and number 9.
No, number 9 is retained, sir.
Yes, it becomes number 9.
Yes. Becomes
All
number
right. To remove all this number of members in the Anti-Terrorism Council that's
Yes.
starting to sound like a bamboo council.
Yes.
What does the sponsor say?
Labing
Accepted.
anim po yung miyembro eh.
Accepted, except that I propose that we retain them as members of the support agencies.
Ah, yes.
Their agencies
Yes.
will be retained in the support agencies, Mr. President.
Okay.
What does that mean? Is it
Support agencies, as mentioned on line 13, page 25.
Okay. All right. Okay. So the sponsor accepts as is now. Any objection? Hearing none, adopted. 9 lang, 9.
No. 9 lang.
Now we can proceed to line 20. To
This
page
is not the
25.
Bamboo Council, Mr.
No,
President. No, page
25.
27, line 7. Line, what line?
7 and 8.
Ito? Ito?
Yung speaking lines po nasa page 38.
Okay. On page 27. On page 27, Mr. President, page 27, lines 7 and 8, delete the phrase alleged violation of any of the acts defined and penalized under sections 4, etc., until until line 9. We repeat that, Mr. President. Line 7 and 8, delete alleged violations, violations until until act,
Page 9, on line 9.
line 9, yes, from alleged on line 7 up to act on line 9, and replace the same for any crime defined and penalized under this act.
So,
Accepted, Mr. President.
add any crime, etc., etc.
For any crime.
Accepted.
For person-
Hearing no objection, adopted.
Ano pa? Page? Ha? Page?
Sa si Amy.
Lines? Lines?
Sa si Amy.
2,
Kanya ulit.
13. Anong gawin dyan? Lines, okay. Okay, on this, for the same substantial amendment, on page 27, lines 11 to 13, delete the phrase, quote, for alleged violation of any of the acts defined and penalized under sections 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 12 of this act,
Of this act.
and replace the same with for any crime defined and penalized under this act.
Oh, man. Kanya.
The same amendment as the
Penalized under this act.
Accepted,
What is-
Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
ano, page item, ano itong item 10? On page 28, lines 11 to 13, delete the phrase on page 28, lines 11 to 13. Ito. Delete ito.
Such as but not limited.
Okay. On lines 11, starting with the word such as, up to line 13, ending with AMLC, that's, we move to delete that. So the...
No replacement, just deletion.
Yes,
So a comma after destruction.
yes.
All right. What does the sponsor say?
Is that comma or semicolon, Mr. President?
Semicolon, sir.
Semicolon.
After the destruct,
Semicolon, semicolon.
after mass
Correct.
destruction.
Correct, semicolon.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
Sunod.
Lines 18 to 19.
Saan dito? 18 to 19. Ha? Okay, so on line 18, matter of style, remove sections 4, starting with sections on line 18, sections and up to 10, and then on the next line up to said crimes, and replace the same with this act.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted,
Accepted.
adopted.
On what?
Yung susunod.
On line two, on page, same page, line 27, just remove the phrase role of
The.
the. Just say the Commission on Human Rights. Matter of style.
What does the sponsor say?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
Mr. President, on pages 30.
Before that, Mr. President, on page 28,
Yes.
role of the Commission on Human Rights. This is found on the present law. I have issue with the phrase concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute public officials,
Where's that?
law enforcers, etc.
Line
etc.
30.
Yes.
I maintain, Mr. President, that the Commission on Human Rights has no prosecutorial powers.
Yes.
So I will move to amend or delete the phrase concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute
Yes.
public officials, etc., etc.
So period and after implementation of this act.
Yes.
Yes, Mr.
May
President.
prosecution din sa umpisa eh. The CHR shall give the highest priority to the investigation and prosecution of
That is
violations.
okay, Mr. President.
Okay
Because
yan.
they can assist in the prosecution.
Okay.
But they should not have concurrent jurisdiction to prosecute
Okay.
Yes.
So
I
period
agree.
after act.
after act, Mr.
Period
President.
after that, delete all the way until page 29, line 2.
From the word end on line 29 all the way to line 2 on page 29,
Yes. Oh,
All right.
the word act, Mr.
All
President.
right. Any objection? Hearing none. Approved. Page 30.
Okay. All right, on page 30 and 31. Okay, this is on line 26. This is promoting peace and industry in schools, learning centers, and training institutions. This provision has no place in an anti-terror bill, Mr. President. I know
Correct.
why this is here.
Correct.
So we propose to delete
The
the entire section.
section 50. What does the sponsor say?
Before I accept, I'd like to defer to the proponent of this provision, Mr. President.
Senator Marcos
This
is
amendment.
recognized.
Yes, Mr. President and Minority Leader, please. This was born of the experience that we just endured, the Lumad schools po in the Cotabato area, as well as we know the recruitment by the NPA in the PUP and other schools here in Metro Manila. So as a result, I think this amendment was put together. But perhaps there are other laws that can take care of that, and we concede that this amendment may be sacrificed. Thank you.
All right. So with that manifestation, what does the sponsor say?
1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended.
Ano pa?
Pwede na.
Ha?
Ito po yung pinadagdag natin kanina.
Okay. Okay.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
After nito, pag ano tayo.
Where is the majority leader, Mr. President? Here he is.
He's here. He's worried about the session is resumed. He's worried about the schedule of the Senate, Mr. President. So
Okay, so the proposal is to delete
the entire
the
section.
entire section.
What does the sponsor say?
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
All right.
Ibang bill.
On, ano to? On page 29,
Bumalik.
huh?
Hindi. Ano na? Okay na.
A matter of style. On page 29, line 9, delete the phrase of this act, matter of style.
All right. Remove of this act.
I cannot see it, but accepted, Mr. President.
The title of section 48. All right, any objection? Adopted.
All right, on page 30, lines 7 and 8, delete the phrase Republic of the Philippines, without exception whatsoever, shall submit the case without undue delay to the DOJ for purpose of prosecution, and replace the same with the following phrase. Anti-Terrorism Council shall refer the case to the Bureau of Immigration for deportation or to the DOJ for prosecution.
Otidere. Otidere.
Yes. Can we repeat that, Mr. President? On lines 7 and 8, delete the phrase from the entire line 7 up to prosecution. Up to
Of before prosecution.
line
Until letter, the word.
8.
7 and 8.
Yes. I
From the
repeat,
word-
on line 7 and 8, delete Republic of the Philippines, et cetera, up to
Prosecution.
prosecution on line 8, and delete this and replace the same. Anti-Terrorism Council shall refer the case to the Bureau of Immigration for deportation or to the DOJ for prosecution. The option is given to the Anti-Terrorism Council where to refer the matter. And the reason we're doing this, Mr. President, is in case there is really no evidence and there is no option to refer it to the Bureau of Immigration, referring it to the DOJ may result in a situation where, because of lack of evidence, the terrorist is released. To foreclose that possibility, we are proposing to give the Anti-Terrorism Council the option of either referring it to the Bureau of Immigration or to the prosecuting fiscal
For deportation.
for deportation
Correct.
or to the DOJ for prosecution.
Yeah. What does the sponsor say?
Under the principle of ut dedere ut judicare, Mr. President, prosecute or extradite.
Yes.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted and adopted.
All right. Oh. Page 32.
Page 32.
Okay. On
Appropriation.
page 32, delete line, lines 8 to 12. Applicability of the revised penal code. Anyway, if it is applicable, the revised penal code itself contains a similar provision.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
Finally, on line 14 to 18, this is the appropriations. Again, it has no place in this bill. It can certainly deserve this appropriation, but it should be in the budget, Mr. President, not here. That's why we propose to delete section as the lines 14 to 16.
The
I'm
new
sorry, to 18.
Accepted, Mr. President.
Accepted, adopted.
No more amendment, Mr. President.
Accepted, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, may we direct the Secretariat to produce another clean copy?
Mr. President,
Because
Okay,
there
the
are,
leader is here,
yes,
Mr.
may I
President.
just ask a question?
He wants to be
Is
recognized.
it the same law that we filed?
why, don't you recognize it?
Parang hindi na eh. We'll see. We'll wait for the clean copy,
It's,
Mr. President.
well, it probably has become better.
Yes, Mr. President. May I just ask for a 1-minute suspension to confer with the sponsor because one of our colleagues wants to propose amendments, but he's not here today. So I will have to ask the pleasure of the sponsor. I will always follow the pleasure of the sponsor, Mr. President. I
What does
will
this-
ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Session suspended. Tatlo pa sila eh.
Oo nga, oo nga. Oo nga. Hindi, ako ba? fairness to him, he's been here every day trying to defend it. I mean, we're also here. Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session resumed.
Mr. President, after conferring with the author and sponsor, I completely rather agree with him that we put this on the agenda for several weeks now. Ang loko nga natin dito ay walang kamatayang Anti-Terrorism Act. And today was supposed to be the final day of deliberations. To give our colleagues a chance to be able to propose some amendments, the good sponsor...
If they still have some
Yes,
amendments.
Mr. President. The good sponsor is willing to wait until the end of the session, which is about another hour from now, while we're deliberating the bill of Senator Gatchalian and sponsorship of about 3 other members. So that would be 1 hour from now. May we ask the staff of Senator Tolentino and Senator Pimentel to please give us the proposed amendments, if possible, now, so that we can study this, and if the sponsor will agree to still further sponsor these amendments.
All right, because there have been a number of days already about on this the period of amendments. We have had several revised copies already.
Yes, Mr.
And
President.
once a bill has passed through the washing machine of the minority leader, you know, it would
The improvements of the minority.
yeah, it would
The
probably be
improvements.
a good bill already.
Yes, Mr.
So-
President. I'm sure
Just for the
there...
record, Mr. President,
Huh?
just for the record, we take exception to your statement. Ang totoo doon na sinasabi, katayan mo sa aming majority leader.
So naughty, Mr. President. We'll ask him to sit down. He's very tired. No,
All right,
actually,
so what is
yes,
the
Mr.
pleasure of the majority leader?
So with that, Mr. President, we'll suspend temporarily for an hour while awaiting their proposed amendments, Mr. President. We suspend temporarily the measure.
But we are promising the sponsor that we will pass it on second reading
Yes,
today.
Mr. President, I'm not going
All right.
home today without making the motion.
Okay,
to approve
very
the second
good.
reading.
So in the meantime, there is a motion to suspend consideration of 1083. Hearing no objection,
Temporarily, Mr. President.
temporarily suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we'll take up some other matters. Senator Cynthia Villar would like to, ladies first, I believe, she'd like to sponsor a measure. Ito, tita, yung 1342? 1342? Yes. Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special orders, Senate Bill number 1342. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Chair is none. Motion's carried.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 1342 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Is there any objection? Chair is none. Motion's carried. The Secretariat directed to read the title of the measure.
An act addressing food security concerns through integrating instructional gardens in primary and secondary school curricula and promoting the use of urban agriculture and for other purposes.
The distinguished lady senator from Las Piñas, Senator Cynthia Villar, is recognized.
Okay. Mr. President, my esteemed colleagues, a pleasant good afternoon to all. Mr. President, as your chairperson of the Committee on Agriculture and Food, together with the Committee on Basic Education, Arts and Culture, Finance, and Ways and Means, I am pleased to submit to your committee report number 47. This committee report is the result of Senate Bills number 147, 257, 280, 587, and 1264, which were primarily referred to the Committee on Agriculture and Food. This bill aims to address the issue of food security, starting with teaching the youth the fundamental concept about nutrition, the cultural and historical aspect of food supply, as well as the rudiments of planting through the integration of instructional gardens in primary and secondary schools all over the country. Under this bill, local government units will have a crucial role in promoting food security, improved health, addressing poverty, and creating savings in household expenditures through institutionalizing urban agriculture. It is the intention of this bill to address the problem revealed by recent studies which show the increase in number of Filipino children suffering from malnutrition, stunted growth, and obesity. Dearth of government policies providing for access to information on nutrition will continue to be an obstacle in promoting healthy growth and development of children. Towards this end, I seek the approval of Committee Report Number 47 on Senate Bill Number 1342. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Villar. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. To allow our colleagues to study the measure further, we move to suspend consideration of this.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer from the calendar of ordinary business to special order Senate Bill Number 1365 under Committee Report Number 51.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none, motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill Number 1365 and ask the Secretary to read the title of the measure.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none, motion is carried. The Secretariat is directed to read the title of the measure.
An act institutionalizing the alternative learning system in basic education for out-of-school youth, adults, and children in special extreme cases and appropriating funds therefore.
Mr. President, may we recognize the distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, the chairperson of the Committee on Education, Basic Education, no other than Senator Sherwin T. Gatchalian.
The dashing bachelor from Valenzuela, Senator Gatchalian, is recognized.
Okay, but I'm just second to the trabajador ng Senado, Mr. President. Mr. President, esteemed fellow senators, I bid you good afternoon. Over the past decade, Mr. President, the Philippines has enacted a number of landmark laws which have achieved substantial reforms within our education system. However, despite the gains we have made, we must also remember the millions of Filipinos who continue to be left behind by our education system. According to the May 2018 Philippines Education Note of the World Bank Group, at least 24 million Filipinos over the age of 15 have not completed basic education. There are an additional 2.4 million children between ages 5 and 14 who are not in school. In essence, this means that 26.4 million Filipinos, roughly one-fourth of the Philippine population, have been denied the right to basic education enshrined in the 1987 Constitution. The Department of Education's Alternative Learning System, or ALS, is the government's primary means of providing accessible education to out-of-school youth, adult Filipinos, and children in special extreme cases whose right to basic education has been denied. Through the non-formal module-based lessons of the Accreditation and Equivalency Program, ALS allows these learners to make up for the lost time and earn basic and secondary education credentials by passing the ANE assessment and certifications. In theory, the goal of ALS is to achieve a 100% high school graduation rate among Filipinos. Unfortunately, ALS has not been able to live up to these admittedly ambitious goals. Between 2016 to 2018, a little over 2 million Filipinos enrolled in ALS. Only 1.4 million completed the ANE program, and just 390,057 passed the ANE test. This means that during the 3-year period, only 7.6% of all eligible Filipino learners enrolled in ALS. Worst, only 1.5% of them were able to earn their basic or secondary education equivalency through the program. Mr. President, the anemic rate of engagement of eligible children, OSY, and adult learners in the alternative learning system is simply unacceptable. To deny their right to education is to deny these vulnerable citizens a second chance at creating better lives for themselves and their families. We must act now to reverse this injustice and provide our countrymen with the education they deserve. With this in mind, Mr. President, the bill we are sponsoring today seeks to institutionalize a reform the alternative learning system of the Department of Education. This legislation was crafted to address in careful detail the gaps and weaknesses within the current ALS framework in close coordination with the Department of Education and other critical stakeholders. First, the Alternative Learning System Act seeks to institutionalize the alternative learning system as a parallel learning system complementary to the formal education system through the establishment of the Bureau of Alternative Education, or BAE, within the Department of Education. In 2016, the reorganization of the DepEd caused the dissolution of the Bureau of Alternative Learning System, with its functions being integrated into other bureaus of the department. Previously, non-formal education had always had its own bureau under the DepEd since 1940s. Based on the input of DepEd and other stakeholders, the lack of dedicated ALS bureau has negatively impacted the DepEd's capacity to operate alternative learning programs and regulate its accreditation and equivalency programs. Thus, the reestablishment of a separate bureau within the DepEd will enhance the institutional and technical capacities of the department to operate alternative learning programs that meet high standards of education quality, learner access, and learner outcomes regarding both basic literacy and more advanced equivalency accreditations. Second, this bill seeks to expand and strengthen the ALS teacher program. According to the DepEd, there are only 9,535 ALS teachers nationwide, with 840,446 learners enrolled in ALS in the year of 2018. This means that the learner-to-teacher ratio was 88:1. Considering that as many as 26.4 million Filipinos qualify to enroll in alternative learning system, this means that there is only one teacher for every 2,768 potential ALS learners. To address this problem, by facilitating the recruitment of new ALS teachers and facilitators, as well as promoting the professional growth of existing ALS teachers, Section 10 of the bill mandates the Department of Budget and Management to work with the DepEd and the Civil Service Commission to create teaching positions for ALS teachers and allocate the corresponding salary grades. In addition, the DepEd shall also hire ALS literacy volunteers and instructional managers to be ALS teachers through a contracting scheme to augment the needed human resource requirements for the implementation of the ALS programs. The bill also provides allowances to ALS teachers, who are mostly mobile teachers, for transportation and teaching aid. This bill also mandates the establishment of at least one ALS Community Learning Center, or CLC, in every municipality and city throughout the country. Unlike the formal education system, which has school buildings, there is no dedicated learning space for ALS programs to hold classes or give tests. This was a major problem identified by the DepEd in the prior implementation of ALS. Through the establishment of ALS CLCs across the country, ALS teachers and learners will finally have access to the physical infrastructure needed to facilitate learning. Lastly, the ALS Act will empower the private sector to partner with government in the delivery of ALS services by mandating the formulation of standards for service delivery, including teacher qualifications, teacher deployment, teacher training, remuneration, and system of rewards and incentives which are responsive to the needs and distinct situations of the particular areas serviced by these non-government actors. All in all, Mr. President, the reform and revitalized alternative learning system envisioned by the ALS Act is poised to provide millions of Filipino learners with a second chance to obtain a quality education. The potential of this legislation to uplift the lives of millions of our fellow citizens is boundless. Just ask our colleague, one of the most famous ALS graduates, Senator Manny Pacquiao. Unfortunately, wala ho siya dito. Our senator and boxing champion was a first-year high school dropout who took and passed the ANE test under the ALS program in 2007. He got his high school diploma and is now an inspiration and model for out-of-school youth and adults who are determined to learn and gain functional literacy skills outside the formal schooling. Mr. President, panahon na para tutukan natin ang mga pangangailangan ng mga kabataang Pilipino na nangangailangan ng tabang edukasyon sa ating lipunan. Isang malaking kapabayaan kung hindi natin pagtuunan ng pansin ang milyon-milyong Pilipino na hindi nag-aaral. Ang panukalang batas na inihain ng iyong lingkod ay naglalayong mailapit sa kanila ang pagkakataon para magkaroon ng mas maganda at mas masaganang kinabukasan. As the chairman of the Senate Committee on Basic Education, Arts, and Culture, I hope you will all join me in advocating for the swift passage and enactment of this bill into law. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, Senator Pacquiao did not just finish high school, but he also recently got his diploma for college. A college diploma at UMac, University of Makati. So
How's that? Because of
congratulations.
that?
Well, yes, Mr. President, because of his
Because of the program.
ALS, he was able to finish high school.
Yeah.
So to be able to take up his college course. So congratulations as well to the sponsor. Mr. President, we have three members who wish to, actually four members who wish to co-sponsor the measure, and they requested that their co-sponsorship speeches be inserted into record as read in the Senate. Mr. President, these are Senators Bong Revilla, which I have his speech here, Mr. President, submitted to the Secretariat in a while, Senator Ralph Recto, Senator Manny Pacquiao, and Senator Binay on this measure.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, so inserted.
Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to study the measure further, I move to suspend consideration of the same.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion suspend, consideration is granted.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration on Senate Bill number 1086.
Is there any objection? Hearing none. Motion's carried.
This is very, very important as far as I'm concerned, Mr. President, very important measure creating the Philippine High School for Sports. The status of the measure, we are in the period of amendments. There's just one final, one of our colleagues have an amendment to make, Senator Richard Gordon. So may we suspend for
Should we
1
suspend
minute
first? Yes.
to be able to contact Senator Gordon?
is
Yes.
at the lounge.
How about, it's there, no? Okay. Before we, instead of suspending, Mr. President, let's continue
Okay.
so that Senator Tolentino, which had submitted an amendment, may be tackled by the sponsor. So may we recognize Senator Gatchalian.
The distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to just manifest the amendment of Senator Tolentino. Apparently, he's sick today, and he sent me his amendment for this representation to put on record. So on page 2A, line 19, add a new paragraph. It shall read as follows. The PHSS shall likewise ensure an alternative and equitable admission process to enhance the access of indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities, and students from other marginalized groups. So moved, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion by the sponsor is adopted.
1 minute suspension.
Session suspended for a minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed, and just to remind the body that we are using the amended copy as of February 18, 2020 of Senate Bill number 1086.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes, distinguished gentleman from Zambales, Senator Richard Gordon is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would request my colleague, seatmate, Chairman Gatchalian, the Honorable Chairman Gatchalian, if he will accept some amendments.
Yes, Mr. President. Would be
Then
glad
we're
to-
done. He's already accepted all the amendments.
We were just talking about Pacquiao a while ago.
Mr. President, I'll address the amendment to my good colleague. On page 1, line 7, after the word shall, insert the phrase establish a national sports program with shall. By the way, there's a quotation before establish and a close quotations in shall.
Accept, Mr. President.
Then objection? Chair is none. Motion's carried.
Thank you, sir. On page 1, on the same page 1, line 7, after the word programs, insert the word intramurals, open quotes, close quotes, intramurals, and add a comma.
Accept, Mr. President.
Thank you, sir.
Hearing no objection, so amended.
On section 2, with respect to the declaration of principles, Mr. President, and I shall read. Section 2, Declaration of Principles. Article 14 of the 1987 Constitution recognizes the role of the state to protect and promote the right of all citizens to quality education at all levels and to take appropriate steps to make such education accessible to all. The state also recognizes the vital role of the youth in nation building and shall promote and protect their physical, moral, spiritual, intellectual, and social well-being. Towards this end, the state shall establish a national sports program, and that is the amendment after shall, establish a national sports program which shall, and then continue to the original text, to promote physical education and encourage sports program, comma, add intramurals, comma. That is the amendment, Your Honor.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Thank
Hearing
you,
no
sir.
objection, so
And just for
amended.
purposes of history, the rationale is, of course, the state shall establish a national sports program to ensure that all schools are promoting physical education, intramurals, and other league competitions to foster teamwork, discipline, and camaraderie. That's in the Constitution as well.
Yes.
Now, on page 3A, line 29C,
3A. Line
29C,
29C.
after the words open quote system, close quote system, insert the phrase, quotes, in accordance with a national sports program, close quotes.
I
What does
That's
the
accept,
sponsor say?
accept, Mr. President.
So amended. No objection, so amended.
So just to be sure, subsection A, paragraph A, subsection A, to formulate policies, guidelines, and criteria in order to rationalize the establishment, administration, and operation of the sports high schools under the Philippine High School for Sports System in accordance with the national sports program.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. And then the
Noted.
last amendment, Mr. President, lastly on page 4, line 26, insert a new paragraph, I, close quotes, open quotes, to read as, colon, the amendment is, quotes, to recruit the best student athletes from the different regions of the Philippines to be enrolled in the Philippine High School Sports, High School to better, the PHSS, to better hone their skills and talents, semicolon, close quotes.
I accept, Mr. President.
No
Thank you, Your
objections, hearing no objections, so amended.
That is all, Mr. President, and I thank the good gentleman for facilitating all the amendments, because this is all meant to follow what Senator Risa Ontiveros stated, that we should have a national sports program accompanying the Philippine high school.
I also thank the good gentleman from Zambales and my seatmate and my chairman in the Red Cross for enhancing the bill and also making the bill and putting in the bill that a national program is indeed a necessary activity to make sure that everything is in line in terms of our sports agenda. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Gordon and Senator Gatchalian. Majority Leader?
Yeah. Wala na? Meron? Meron? Wala. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, with that, I move to close the period of amendments. If
Yeah.
there's no more amendments from our course. No more. Yes, we close the period of amendments.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. Um, Mr. President, with the permission of the good sponsor, if we can be made co-authors of the measure, Senator Gordon, myself, of course, Senator Risa,
And this
Senator
representation.
Joel, the presiding officer, Mr. President, and Senator Bato de la Rosa, who is also a sportsman, a great combat shooter, Mr. President. And magaling din sa hide and seek.
Varsity in varsity player for hide and seek
For hide and seek, magaling.
category.
Basta police, Mr. President, magaling yan sa seek.
Is
and
there
hide.
any objection? The chair hears none. Motion's carried by.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move that we approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1086 under Committee Report number 12.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, the motion of the majority leader is carried.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend consideration of the same.
Then objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Sige. While we are waiting for our colleagues for two more measures, may we ask for 1 minute suspension?
Session is hereby suspended.
Nakadalawang batas, tatlong batas na yan. Ganun lang ba yun? Ganun lang ba yun? Ipapakong natin. Layo mo ng buwan sa Digos. Pakain ka naman. Boundary na yan. Ayoko na. Boundary na. Last na nga. Ayaw na ng presiding officer.
Si Risa na lang, Risa. Si Risa na lang.
Ano, okay na? Ano to? Policy Institute. Ha? Wala tayo Monday. Even the hearing? No. Hearings. It will pave way for the use of session hall for the whole day. Parang ganun lang din. Parang sinabi mo namin yung ganun din.
Oh, shucks. Di ako makakaalis. Supposed to leave on...
Nasunog na hotel mo eh. Okay.
Session is resumed. Mr. Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I move to, didn't I already call it kanina? Wala pa, no? I haven't called it. So just for the record, Mr. President, we move to resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1296.
Is there any objection? Chair hears none. Motion's carried.
This is an act establishing the Philippine Energy Research and Policy Institute. Mr. President, the status is we are in the period of interpellation. No other colleague would like to interpellate this distinguished gentleman from Valenzuela, unless the presiding officer would want to.
I'm being tempted, but
I believe it's just really a policy institute, Mr. President.
I've seen this. I've seen
Yeah.
this.
So, Mr. President, I move to close the period of interpellation.
Is there any objection? The chair hears none. The motion to close the period of interpellation and debate is adopted.
And also for the record, Senator Franklin M. Dillon, our distinguished minority floor leader, is listed here. I sought his position on this, and he says he will no longer interpellate. So just for the record.
Looking at the committee report, I placed may interpellate and introduce amendments, but I will forego with my
Yes, Mr. President.
May blowout ka, Mr. President.
still here.
I'm sure the sponsor will not forget that, Mr. President. He will not forget that
Well,
gesture.
we already
Yes.
decided on terminating the period of interpellation and debate.
Yes, Mr.
So what's now
So the next motion, Mr. President, is to move for the period of amendments. I believe the good sponsor has some amendments, Mr. President. So I move to open the period of amendments.
Is there an objection? Chair
you,
is
Mr.
none.
President.
Motion's carried. The
Mr.
distinguished
President,
gentleman from Valenzuela is
in,
recognized.
In gratitude to the swift movement of this bill, Mr. President, alam ko ang weakness ng ating good majority floor leader, Mr. President. So later on, we will make sure that he gets his reward. Mr. President,
Is this a new thing, or it's the same?
it's always the same, Mr.
Okay,
President.
always.
Mr. President, for the record, this bill has been approved in the 17th Congress.
Yes.
Last 17th Congress,
I
the
remember.
Senate passed this bill. Unfortunately, our counterpart in the lower house never approved their version, Mr. President. So I refiled it during the 18th Congress, and now I'm seeking the approval of the body, Mr. President. To go into the amendments, Mr. President, I have only few amendments. On page 7,
Page 7.
delete the lines 18 to 28. So move, Mr. President.
Lines 18
To 28.
to 28. Is there any objection? Chair is none. Motion's carried.
On page 7, lines 30 to 31, delete the phrase "for the organizational and operational requirements of the Institute," such that the section now starts with "there is hereby appropriated out of the General Appropriations Act." I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
On page 7, line 32,
Wait.
delete the words and number 100 million pesos and replace it with words and number 200 million pesos. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
That's it, Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Gatchalian, Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the permission also of the sponsor, if Senator Joel Villanueva, myself, and Senator Risa Ontiveros,
And the
Senator
hardworking senator from Mindanao, Senator
de la
Bato.
Rosa, be made co-authors, Mr. President, with the permission of the gentleman.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, motion's carried.
Mr. President, I move to approve, close the period of interpellation, Mr. President.
Amendments.
Close the period of amendments.
The motion to close the period of amendments. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the motion is carried.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1296. I so move, Mr. President.
Is there an objection? Chair hears none. The motion to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1296 is hereby carried.
Mr. President, I'd like to commend the sponsor. He was very prolific. He's a prolific legislator.
Quick in everything.
Being an author of 3 measures that were approved on second reading. ALS,
Just today.
high school, no, 4 measures. Good measure, good manners and right conduct, and the sports, and the Policy Institute as well for the Energy Department.
That's
You are
why
the
that's why
junior
the sponsor is
doctor.
indebted to the good majority leader.
Yeah. But remember, Mr. President, that could not have happened without a loving majority floor leader who loves his kumpadre. Mr. President.
I hope we stop on that.
Yes, Mr. President.
Majority leader.
Mr. President, I move to suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 1296.
Is there an objection? Chair hears none. Motion is carried.
Before we take up, go back to the measure of Senator Ping Lacson, just a housekeeping matter, Mr. President. I'm not sure if I was made a co-author of the alternative learning system. With the permission of the sponsor, if Senator Joel Villanueva, because I have the letter right here, together with this representation, Mr. President, be made co-author together with Senator Franklin Drilon, Senator Risa Ontiveros, and Senator Bato de la Rosa as co-sponsors and co-authors of the alternative learning system.
Is there any objection to the motion of the majority leader? Chair hears none. The motion is carried.
So, Mr. President, I believe that Senator Tolentino already has the 3 possible amendments for the sponsor of the Anti-Terrorism Act to act on. May I ask for 1 minute suspension to ask Senator Lacson to proceed back to the session hall.
Session is hereby suspended.
Yeah.
Session resumed.
Ready to resume, Mr. President? Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 1083.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of 1083 is back in order.
Mr. President, I believe Senator Francis Tolentino has already submitted his proposed amendments to the distinguished sponsor. May we hear from the sponsor, Mr. President? I move that we open again, once again, resume consideration or resume the period of amendments, Mr. President, just to be clarified on our
All right.
status.
We are still in the period of amendments.
That's correct, Mr. President.
Individual amendments.
So may we recognize the sponsor on this measure, Senator Panfilo Lacson.
Senator Lacson, gentleman from Cavite, is recognized.
I move to close.
So, wala kang explanation sa binigay niya, sir?
No, I move to close the period of amendments, Mr.
Okay, Mr. President.
I thought there were amendments from Senator Tolentino.
There's none, nobody's here to introduce amendments, Mr. President.
All right. So, Majority
There's an
Leader.
understanding which was relayed to the staff of the senators concerned that we'll just take up their proposed amendments during the BICAM.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Majority Leader, what is the motion?
If that is the agreement, Mr. President, therefore, I move to close the period of amendment, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, period of amendments is closed on Senate Bill 1083.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 1083.
Any objection? Hearing none, Senate Bill 1083 is approved on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, probably so that Senator Tolentino would have a peace of mind, probably in the period of the BICAM, we can appoint him as a member of the Bicameral Conference Committee.
Oh, yes.
Which, anyway, he should be,
After
I believe.
we approve this on third reading.
Yes, Mr. President, because he's a chairman of the Committee on Local Government, Mr. President. Mr. President, so that we can take this up on third reading next week, I move that we suspend consideration of the measure.
All right, consideration of the measure suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just check.
Till when?
Mr. President, on Monday, we have very important hearings, and I believe they would like to borrow the session hall on Monday for these important hearings. Mr. President, with the permission of the body, and we sought approval from all our colleagues and 99% approval from all our colleagues, that we suspend session, adjourn session rather, till the 26th of February, because on the 25th, we have no work. It's a
holiday.
declared national holiday.
National holiday.
So, Mr. President, to allow our colleagues to utilize all our rooms on Monday for very important hearings, particularly the session hall, we move to adjourn session until the 26th Monday, 26th February, Wednesday, rather, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I so move.
Any objection?
26. Let me repeat, Mr. President. I move to adjourn session 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Wednesday, February 26, 2020, Mr. President.
Any objection? The chair hears none. The session is adjourned until 3 o'clock in the afternoon of Wednesday, February 26, 2020.